The protagonist had enough men to make her feel special. Each of them was different. Handsome with long white hair, or with a short haircut and a love of flowers. One of the 10 was devout, praying almost always. Another had dark skin and looked different from the others. The other 2 were aristocrats, and their manners and style screamed wealth. All 10 of them were in love with one girl, the main character of this story, who struck with her beauty, leaving no chance not to fall in love. And there she was, Daisy Heidi, who was far from the main role. But she smiled smugly because she knew the book by heart, so she had an advantage. She was now happy and dreamy, because now she had bought a house and would earn money and soon become rich and famous. But it didn't happen that way. Those were just dreams, and the reality was different. She was not mentioned at all because she was poor and only noticed when she was sitting on the street, leaning against the fence. Now she was washing the floor in her small, poor house, trying to do everything right. But a noise caught her attention, and Daisy turned around, stopping what she was doing for a few seconds to notice the guests in her yard. Polyp was being led by 3 men in identical attire, uniforms, that left no doubt as to who they were. The boy was crying, wiping his face with his hand and bowing his head. The girl dropped everything and ran outside, calling the boyfriend and asking him what had happened. She was scared, because this had never happened before and she didn't know what he had done. A handsome man was hovering over her, looking directly at the girl and asking her if she was Daisy Heidi. He did not smile and only caused fear with his appearance. The girl opened her mouth, looking at him and feeling only one thing. Something ominous stirred inside her, warning her that nothing good would come of this visit. Everyone turned their attention to the sobbing Polyp, who called her name and wiped his eyes with his sleeves, saying he was sorry. The man standing in front of her, who had raised his voice a few seconds earlier, closed his eyes, apparently to calm himself. He confirmed that it was Daisy and told her that the Duke of Hanson was waiting for her. She couldn't believe it, shouting and asking questions, and Polyp's face immediately changed. He looked at Daisy in awe, for she had been summoned to the Duke. The girl jumped up and down at the news. The men took her by the arms, dragging her to the carriage, while she resisted and asked why they were doing this. She knew that nothing good could come of this challenge. Polyp shouted for her not to worry, because he was the most noble aristocrat in town. He shouted for the girl to remember that he would not do anything illegal because he was too scared, and asked her to put in a good word for him. Resisting while the 2 men tried to shove her and the carriage into it, Daisy shouted at the boy because it was unfair. He had done something, and they were taking her to the Duke. She looked out of the carriage window, lost in her own thoughts, and furrowed her brow. She mentally promised to kick Polyp's ass when she returned from the Duke's estate. A silent man sat in front of her, and she looked at him and thought that there was probably no point in asking him anything, because he wouldn't say anything anyway. The Duke of Hanson is the epitome of beauty and grace. White hair that sparkles under the pontifex sun, pale and soft skin, and a cold-blooded personality. The girl was embarrassed. The Duke's status was so high that people like her or Polyp had never seen him. And she had even more questions about the reason for this call. She was also worried because the main character was his daughter, because it was from him that she received such genes that did not leave anyone indifferent. They drove up to a majestic and incredibly beautiful mansion that caught the eye of everyone who was at least happy to be there. Great style, always blooming flower beds and gardens and fountains. Daisy was standing next to one of the men in front of the door of the Duke's office when he knocked and waited for an answer. As soon as they entered, the man said he had brought Daisy, and the Duke ordered the servant to leave. The girl was frightened to be standing so close to him and seeing him with her own eyes. Duke Hanson sat with his back to the door. He was looking out the huge windows that overlooked the garden, and the room itself looked luxurious. His house really looked like a mansion. It was just as big and beautiful. The girl fell to her knees, resting her palms on the carpet on the floor and bowing her head, as she thought that bowing was the best course of action. When she refused to sit down and remained on her knees, he turned and, holding a paper in his hands, told her to listen to him carefully and answer only when he asked her something. The Duke of Hanson began to read, listing her age, the fact that she had grown up without parents because she had been abandoned, and that her hometown was unknown. Daisy bowed her head, closing her eyes and feeling a stab of pain from everything he listed. The man came closer, stopping only centimeters from the girl's face. He asked her if she had worked at the Chenu restaurant on the pier, and she said she was still working there. Sitting down in a chair with different armrests, he still held the piece of paper in his hand, calmly saying that she was no longer because she was fired today. This information surprised her, making her eyes bulge in disbelief. How did this happen? She drank a little too loudly, looking at the Duke. The girl was desperate, and it was evident from her behavior and reaction. The Duke, propping his head up with his arm, his elbow on the armrest, silently watched the girl for several seconds, not taking his eyes off her. He looked bored, while Daisy bowed her head, explaining that she could only survive because of her job at the restaurant. The man tossed her something, saying it was her salary for the month, dropping the chain of the jewelry so that it flew to the girl. The pendant was very beautiful. A red stone sat in the heart of an atypical piece of jewelry, the smooth lines of which only complemented the beauty of the ruby. Daisy couldn't take her eyes off the jewelry lying on the floor in front of her. She heard the Duke ask her if she recognized it, but her pampered eyes and the fear in them betrayed her. Duke Hanson said, watching her, that her foolish friend had tried to sell the jewelry in the jewelry store. Rising from his seat, the Duke continued to speak, saying that the jeweler suspected the theft and approached the Duke, and the boy began to tell him that it was Daisy who had given him the jewelry. He reminded him that the crime of selling stolen goods is a serious one, saying that he would never allow rats to even crawl around him. He stepped on the jewelry, breaking the pendant, but the stone remained under the Duke's shoe. He looked scary as he loomed over the girl and asked her where she had gotten the thing. Daisy stared at the same spot in front of her, still looking scared because the situation was not good. Her eyes were still trying to get out of their sockets as she heard the order, "Speak." Polyp shouted that he would wait for Daisy at home. He was still a child, and he was also whiny about everything, and a little naive. He was just like his namesake, a colon polyp, impossible to get rid of because he was so clingy. However, he was her only friend. The girl recalled how Polyp came running to her in tears, telling her from the doorstep that he was in trouble. She was so surprised that she even stopped doing laundry. The boy rushed toward her, but Daisy put her foot out to push him away, telling him to stay away from her. Wrapping her arms around herself, she ordered him to speak from where she had pushed him away. Daisy was worried about what had happened and didn't want the guy to get too close. Sitting on the floor, Polyp began to complain that he didn't have the money to move in with his mother, telling her about the story of the landlord who wouldn't return the deposit. Holding her head, the girl stretched her hand forward, stopping the boy's story and asking why she needed this information, since she had no money. But Polyp continued anyway, now asking why she didn't sympathize with him, because he and his mother were in trouble and friends should support each other. He began to cry for greater effect, which completely confused the girl. She looked at him as if she had never seen him before. And then she held out the box, asking him to stop crying. Opening it, Polyp saw a beautiful pendant that had a difficult shape and a stone inside. The next moment, the girl was trying to restrain her friend, who was trying to reach out to hug her. She began to explain that the pendant should not be sold in a jewelry store because it would be suspected of theft. And now she sat and thought that Polypus was so stupid that he never listens to good advice, and that because of him, she ended up in front of the Duke. Looking at the paper in his hands, the Duke said that the boy had to buy a carriage for his girlfriend, but he was more interested in why such a girl has expensive jewelry. Daisy began to tell that she had bought the pendant at an auction and that it was not from the black market. But looking at the girl, Duke Henston said that it was strange, because the owner of the pendant died recently, and usually auctions of this level are held quickly and only among acquaintances. Listening to the Duke, who did not believe her story, the girl rolled her eyes. She was afraid of what would happen next. She said she would tell him everything from the beginning. The Duke, holding his chin, was satisfied and ordered to begin. Bowing her head and bowing before her husband, Daisy began to talk about the fact that there are many descriptions of the main character of the novel, Fealta Henston. The Duke's attention was completely focused on the girl, and he did not understand what she was talking about at all. But she told everything, even his own memories, trying not to forget anything. Propping his head in his hands and looking at the girl who was ready to answer all his questions, he asked one thing. What is the name of this novel in which they are? The Duke was puzzled by the title, The Reason the Young Duchess Rolls in the Pumpkin Field, because his daughter had no reason to go near the fields. Daisy looked away in embarrassment, ashamed of the name, because she had come up with it. She was the author of that novel. Scratching the back of her head, she smiled, still embarrassed. She said that he was right, and asked herself why she gave her creation such a name. There were 10 writers in the novel of that name. Friends wrote their ideas and fantasies into it, creating 10 male characters that each of them liked, but with one heroine. Explaining this to the Duke, Daisy said that she thought writing this novel would give her the satisfaction she wanted. However, she only thought so. Clasping her hands in a prayer gesture, the girl said that one day she woke up in a novel that she had written together with friends. Duke Hanson looked at the girl, asking again if she really said that his daughter was the main character of the novel. Satisfied with this, the Duke asked to tell what would happen to his daughter next, and Daisy was frightened. How could she tell this? She was in a panic. The heroine would be the cause of greed and pleasure, but this could not be told to her father under any circumstances. The Duke lost the smile that had recently been on his face. He heard that there was no happy ending in this story. Falling to the floor again, the girl began to cry, asking for forgiveness from the Duke. And the very next second, she was interested, because the Duke asked about his daughter's lover, and Daisy, without realizing it, said about lovers. The man furrowed his brows, looking a little angry. He questioned whether she had really said about lovers and not about a lover. Having learned that there were 10 of them, he got up from his seat and stood in front of the window, promising himself that he would not let them get close to his daughter and kill all of them until the devil's mother. The girl could not believe her ears. Did he really say that he would destroy everyone? Putting her hand on her heart, she tried to convince him that all this would happen in the distant future.
Daisy, determined to prevent war for the sake of her daughter's salvation, asked the Duke to entrust salvation to her, because she is the author and knows the plot and will be able to avoid it.
The man turned, smiling and looking at the girl. Spreading her arms to the sides, Daisy convinced the Duke that she would not allow his daughter to get close to all the boys who would attack her in the future. Returning, he asked what would happen if it didn't work out and assured him that he didn't need Daisy's life, which she had promised in case her plan failed. She was interrupted by a maid who announced that the Duke was late for a meeting. Returning to the girl, the Duke once again asked her if she could really protect Pierre. When she agreed, the man held out his hand for her to lean on while he rose from his knees and said that he would allow the meeting with his daughter and that Daisy had only one chance to protect her. The next moment she was already flying backwards because the Duke pulled her too sharply, lifting her from her knees. Duke Hanson frowned, taking it all as a sign that the author and the heroine should not see each other. Standing at the door of his daughter's rooms, the Duke turned to the girl, saying that he would introduce her as a nanny, but this did not mean that she would work for him. Placing his hands on her shoulders, the man said that she would only be a candidate for her nanny and that she needed to look better than she did now. After fixing her handkerchief, the Duke opened the door to Pierre's room. He said that she must not do anything against the Duchess's will, even if it is for her protection. In front of Daisy stood a little girl with close-cropped hair, smiling sweetly at her future babysitter. She, looking at the child, could not believe that this little girl was the main character they had written. The girl looked adoringly at her father, who stroked her hair and said that she had also cut her braids. Daisy, thinking that the child's hair looked like a cactus or a chestnut shell, almost cried out that she wanted to touch Pierre's hair too. But all she did was bow, greeting Lady Pierretta while she sat on the Duke of Henston's arms. And while his daughter was hugging him, the man smiled faintly, thinking to himself that the candidate would try to get close to his daughter, as she thought. But Daisy came closer, smiling at the child and saying that she was very glad to meet them, asking if she could join their tea party, pulling a piece of candy out of her pocket and completely commanding the child's attention. Holding in her hands a candy in a green wrapper with a frog, the girl smiled because she knew. It was she who described Pierretta's personality and knew that she likes green, sweets, and frogs. When the Duke did agree, because the daughter really wanted to see the candidate as a nanny, they were both very happy, even raising their hands in a gesture of great joy. They all sat at the table on ordinary chairs, even little Pierre, who could barely reach the table. The Duke was not very pleased with the turn of events and said nothing. Daisy poured out a handful of candies in front of the girl, which she had previously taken out of a vase filled with sweets. Pierre was delighted to see how many candies she had. The child was interested in everything, and Daisy was telling where the sweets were, while the Duke sat with a displeased expression on his face and a pie in his hand. After trying 3 different marmalades, the girl jumped up, because the taste was incredible, and immediately turned to her father, causing him to laugh heartily. Sitting down next to his daughter, The Duke said that dinner would be soon and reminded him that he should thank for the sweets and say goodbye to the lovely lady. But Daisy did not give up. She got her last trump card, which caught the child's eye, a candy in the shape of a pumpkin, because the girl adored pumpkins and in the future will feel comfortable in the pumpkin field. Sitting down to look the child in the eyes, the girl said that she also loves pumpkins and will not have dinner unless there is at least one dish with this fruit. Reaching out, she wanted to touch the girl's hair, but she was already running to her dad, still holding the candy in her hand, and Daisy herself felt very embarrassed. Pierre was caught by the Duke, who immediately hugged her and smiled, saying that he would find her a nanny she would like. But the girl quickly slipped out of her father's hands, saying that she liked Daisy's nanny, or caused a total shock to the Duke. And while the Duke was throwing lightning bolts in her direction, the girl was completely crushed by the cute Peta, who called her a nanny. Sitting on the floor, she could see that the Duke was very unhappy with what had just happened because she had broken all his plans. Out of anger, he even clenched his hands into fists. They returned to the office where the Duke had previously received her. He said that they needed to talk if the situation had already taken such a turn. Daisy was over the moon because she will be the nanny of his daughter, who is also the main character, as she almost reminded the man in front of her, but stopped in time. However, Duke Hanson quickly set his own condition. She would only pretend to be a nanny, and her main task would be to keep those men away from Peta. The Duke stared at Daisy for a few seconds, his eyes fixed on her as she said she wouldn't go into details as long as he was paying her. It was unexpected. While he was writing the terms of the contract on paper, he voiced them, and the first point had already shocked the girl. She had to live in the palace. The second condition made him smile, as he promised a small reward for rescuing his daughter from each male character. Daisy's mouth fell open in surprise as she looked at the number of her paycheck that she would be receiving each week while the Duke enjoyed the effect he was having on her. She had just put her signature when the man immediately took the piece of paper from the table, leaving her puzzled. Folding the document, he smiled, because now his daughter's fate will change, and asked the girl to write everything she knows about male characters. A notebook immediately appeared in front of her, where she had to write down all the facts she remembered. Duke Hanson was surprised to read all about those boys who were to ruin Peta's fate. He couldn't believe that the guard commander's son and the wizard from the tower were there. Daisy tried to explain that she wrote only 5, because she could not remember the names of the others, because they were very difficult. But, sitting in front of the Duke on her knees, the girl assured that she would recognize their faces if she ever saw them. An idea had already formed in the man's head. He wanted to call everyone to tomorrow's ball, so that Daisy could identify everyone, and they both knew who to keep as far away as possible. The girl did not know what to say, because the Duke had planned the ball just now and wanted to send the invitation to everyone now, when it was past 10 in the evening. The next day, Duke Hanson said that everyone had responded, except for one family whose head was temporarily absent, and there would be 150 guests in total. Hearing about clothes for herself, Daisy already began to dream about a beautiful style of dress, pearls, and an elegant outfit. She couldn't wait for the festive ball, because she had never been to them, and now she had such an opportunity. But all this was just a dream. In fact, she was now standing in the middle of the hall where everyone was dancing, holding a mountain of dirty dishes and asking herself why she had to be a servant at the ball. Sitting in front of the mirror some time ago, the Duke explained that the balls, apart from the guests, were attended only by the servants because the nannies had nothing to do there. While Daisy was trying to hold a pile of dishes, she was approached by a nice woman who, with a smile and politeness, asked to fetch her comb from the first floor. However, no sooner had she agreed than the other ladies started clamoring to ask her to bring something else, shouting over each other. While Daisy played the role of servant, the Duke sat quietly away on the sofa, drinking wine, watching the girl and wondering if she really had decided to become a maid. The girl was very angry because the Duke ignored her, and she had the feeling that she was doing all this for nothing. But she was distracted by a man's voice, to which she turned, hugging a pile of dishes. A tall, handsome man was tending to his pregnant wife, and Daisy couldn't believe it. Was it really them? She remembered how she and her friend were lying in front of the notebooks, discussing the red eyes of one of the main characters, who was a scientist, and it was this feature that made him different. He was an amazing scientist, a genius who was born once every few centuries, a young talent who paid attention only to books on science. But one day he met Peta and forgot about everything in the world, now seeing only her alone. She remembered these storylines that hadn't happened yet. And here he is in front of her. But she looks at his father, just as handsome and with red eyes, and that main character wasn't even born yet. Standing a little further away, Daisy was moved by the husband's attitude towards his wife, his support, attention, and efforts to do everything for her comfort. The next moment, the girl was pushed by one of the newly arrived guests, a tall, handsome man who did not even try to bypass the other guests, considering himself higher than everyone else. Stepping on the pregnant woman's dress, his daughter quickly ran after her father, almost not keeping up with his wide step. Both of them didn't even look at those they left behind. They talked about the fact that she had to make the Duke fall in love with her, and his daughter could be given to be raised by the servants so as not to interfere. And they argued about it all the way. Raising her pregnant cape, Daisy looked in the direction of the Marquis and his daughter, not believing her ears. The girl kept thinking about who Pierretta's mother was, because they didn't prescribe it, and there was no point in asking the Duke. He still wouldn't tell. Throwing a cape over the pregnant woman's shoulders, she decided that her primary task was to take care of the mother of the unborn main character, so she asked if everything was fine with her health. Now the Countess was sitting on a chair, holding her stomach with one hand and closing her eyes. She was resting, coming to herself. Daisy lied with a sweet smile, justifying knowing the pregnant woman's name by saying that the Duke had ordered her to be taken care of. Having rested a little, the couple decided to go to the Duke to say hello to him and still start having fun at the ball. The Count supported his wife, hugging her shoulders. The girl was called by one of the guests, who was drunk enough to have it written on his flushed face. He, saying that Daisy could work for him, put his hand on her butt, which made the girl herself not know where to go. Such harassment was new to her. But after a few seconds, he was holding his head, and Daisy was tightly holding a plate in her hands, with which she applied a nice cheek on the head. He was offering her unforgivable things. But the shock passed, and now she understood. She was well grounded after all. She hit the Duke's guest. As soon as the man recovered from the shock, he stood up, shouting at the girl, calling her names. Unfortunately, at the same moment the Duke appeared, standing behind her and asking what had happened. The guest began to tell that this girl should be released and sent to the scaffold, showing the wound that was on his head. But the Duke of Hanson gave her the tray, tapping it with his finger and telling her to choose something heavier if she wanted to beat someone. This completely puzzled the girl. The man spoke too much, angering the Duke, who was now putting him in his place, jabbing his finger in his chest and telling him to choose his words before saying anything about his people. Embracing the tray and blushing, Daisy couldn't understand what his words meant, but she watched what was happening in a daze. The Baron, who was still addressing the Duke, was dragged out by the guards while Hanson watched the spectacle and did not react. A shocked Daisy covered her mouth with her hand, not believing her ears. The Duke had said that this was his last meeting with the Baron, and it was all because of her. The Duke of Hanson was now being addressed by the Marquis, who had previously treated the Countess badly, and now he was smiling and showering himself with compliments as he introduced his daughter Belle. The girl looked at the Duke in awe, saying that she was looking forward to meeting him. Belle was stunningly beautiful with curls and in her blue dress. The Duke sat in his place with a glass in his hand, thinking of himself, while Belle realized that he was very handsome, and that being the mother of his children was not so bad, though she had thought otherwise. Her father's eyes almost fell out of surprise when the girl, smiling sweetly, asked if she could call the Duke by his name, Dion. Looking at her husband, she waited for an answer, while she remembered that she rejected all marriage proposals just for his sake, because she only wanted to be his wife. The Duke did not answer anything, except to apologize, because he was already leaving. He walked past the surprised father and daughter without explaining what exactly was wrong, and only clenched his hand into a fist. It was at that moment that he saw the Baron lashing out at Daisy, who was standing scared and not defending herself from his attacks. And now, when the drunken guest was taken out, Daisy clutched the tray in her hands and said that she had something to tell him. She was confused, because he knew she had a conversation with the Countess Rappel, while she only had to confirm his words. Leaving Daisy alone, he left, finally saying that they would talk in the library that evening. Looking in his direction, the girl heard whispering, because many guests heard this phrase. While helping at the ball further, she heard gossip about an affair. It was not difficult, because everyone was so busy speculating that they did not notice the person they were talking about, although they did not really believe their own conclusions. Daisy, going up the stairs, asked herself where Peta was and why she was not at the ball, because other children were present. She knocked on the door of her rooms, announcing that it was her, so that the child would not be frightened, and then announced that she was coming inside. The little boy was lying on the bed, his head buried in the pillow and his fists clenched. She was upset that she was not allowed to go to the ball. Sitting down behind the bed, Daisy invited the girl to go somewhere with her, but did not say where she decided to take the little duchess. They went out onto the terrace of one of the many mirrored halls of the palace, and Peta was delighted with everything around her, while Daisy carried a tray of goodies. Sitting at the table, the girl kept looking at the mirrored ceiling, saying that it was very beautiful here at night and that she herself would like to arrange a ball. Daisy, smiling and showing the jug in her hands, asked if she would like a drink of warm milk. As the girl reached for her cup, Daisy sat down across from her and asked if it was Daddy who had banned her from her room. That child nodded her head, saying that it was not so, because she herself did not want to go to the ball, and Uncle was of no use here. She said that everyone wanted to touch her hair, so she didn't go, and Daisy echoed her, saying that they looked amazing. Peta said that it is possible to touch her hair if she allows, which caused the nanny too violent reaction. She got up from the table. Immediately, the Duchess said that only her uncle could touch her hair now, and she could not. The girl was puzzled, because it was the second time the girl had called Duke Hanson uncle. She could not believe it, because she was the author of this novel, and did not know that Dion was Peta's uncle, not her father. Some time later, when they returned from the terrace to the room, Daisy was helping the girl into her pajamas, getting the girl ready for bed. They smiled and talked about pumpkins, because the girl's pajamas were with them, and she thought that they were the most delicious thing in the world. Delighted with the evening and the babysitter, the little girl quickly closed her eyes, falling asleep almost immediately as Daisy admired her appearance. Getting down on the floor and resting on the bed, the girl closed her eyes and exhaled. The day was extremely difficult. She remembered asking then why she called the Duke Papa, wondering what Peta had said, because he would be sad if she didn't call him that. Facing the bed and leaning against it, Daisy thought about meeting Hanson, but the dream got the better of her. She heard someone's voice through her slumber, but she didn't even suspect that it was Dion Hanson who had entered her niece's room and was now covering Daisy with a blanket so that she wouldn't get cold. The next day, Daisy talked about what she had learned at the ball, about the son of Count Rappel, and how she was trying to remember everything about the main male characters. Looking at his documents and supporting his head with his hand, the Duke said that the boy had not yet been born, but had already caused a lot of problems. Daisy, on the Duke's orders, mentioned how Peta would meet this boy, talking about the fact that he would become her tutor, because he would be a genius and finish school much earlier than the others. She told a story where the boy's parents did not have money to send him to study abroad. They were poor, their clothes were all in patches, but they wanted better things for their son. Folding her hands on her chest, she said disapprovingly that he had dropped out of school for Peta because he had fallen in love, but Daisy didn't like it and spoke about it openly. Opening her eyes, she fell silent, looking fearfully at the Duke of Hanson, who now folded his arms in front of him and, resting his elbows on the table, looked angry. Getting up from his chair, the Duke thought aloud that it was possible to send the Rappel's son to study abroad, as long as he was not his daughter's tutor. That girl was delighted with her romance, so she said that the Duke might change his mind if he heard the story to the end. Frowning, he looked at her, cutting off all attempts at further narration. He said that he didn't care, and that he would decide what to do and how. Turning, he put his hand in his pocket, thinking about himself and letting go of Daisy. Their meeting was over. Nevertheless, she returned without even opening the door, but asking if she could ask something. Dion was looking out the window at this time, and answered, without even turning around, that it was possible, but her question about Peta's false father made him suddenly turn to face her. He was surprised by what she knew, because this is not the kind of information that freely walks around the palace. Closing her eyes, the girl blurted out what Peta had told her yesterday. She was afraid to face his anger and mentally scolded herself because she could not hold her tongue. But she heard the paper fall on the table, so she opened her eyes and stared in surprise at the papers that the Duke had ordered to be read. Daisy was surprised. The Duke was only a few years older, and she also saw with her own eyes the birth certificate, where the girl was indicated as a daughter. Dion got close to the girl, saying that he considered the girl his daughter and threatened her not to let any living soul know about it. The girl promised that she wouldn't tell anyone and that she didn't care if she was really his daughter. But it was important that he took care of Peta better than anyone else, and that was the most important thing. Daisy mentioned that she was surprised by Peta's appearance, but she thinks that she is cute, and most importantly, that she is better with the Duke. Without saying a word, Hanson walked over to the bookshelf, pulling out one of them, puzzling the girl. Holding the papers in her hands, she could not believe her eyes. A huge wardrobe appeared when the closet moved to the side, revealing many flawless dresses. Floating in his thoughts, he said that he chose these things himself and also worked very hard to buy them. But Peta always chooses her own clothes and never wears what he chooses. Daisy was surprised that all the dresses were new, but after that she began to defend the girl's choice because she was active and was very uncomfortable in dresses. She was glad that the Duke was back to his normal self and remembered everything about his daughter. But she was still wondering what to do with the repellus. The girl sat on the bed in her room in the palace, and closing her eyes, exhaled and began to stretch her neck, feeling tired. She lay down on the bed straight in her clothes, arms and legs outstretched. Daisy remembered that she had been messing around with Peta all day, and before that, she had listened to everything related to the girl from the Duke. He loved her very much. But the girl woke up from loud sounds, not understanding their nature, because the ball was already over. She sat on the bed and yawned, covering her mouth with one hand. Leaving the room, Daisy was now standing in the hallway, completely confused. There would be guests at the palace today, and everyone was scrambling to clean the kitchen and prepare a special dinner as ordered by Hanson. Having learned that the guests would be Count and Countess Rappel, under the questioning looks of the maid, Daisy turned around and, holding her skirt, was going to go to the Duke. She ran through the corridors, thinking that the Duke should have been warned about this visit, because she only told him this morning about this family and their future child. What was he up to, and why did he call them? The girl sat on her bed, trying to remain calm, although it was not easy. During the entire evening, she did not see the Duke and could not find him anywhere in the palace. Figuring that he was most likely in the main building, she looked back at her servant's uniform hanging on the closet. She had a plan. Now she was wheeling her food cart through the empty corridors of the palace, heading straight for the hall where the Duke of Hanson was dining. Daisy saw the food prepared for the couple and could not understand why the Duke was trying so hard and what he wanted to achieve with this meeting. The couple were sitting with the Duke, who had just announced his proposal, when Daisy entered the room and stood as if stunned at the suggestion. The Earl looked at the Duke in confusion, saying that he did not understand why he had suggested this. Standing with her back, the girl tried to eavesdrop, hearing only what the Duke was talking about research and science, because the Count's family was always drawn to knowledge. Holding her hand on her stomach, the Countess covered her mouth with her palm. She was surprised and touched by the Duke's proposal, because her husband always dreamed of becoming a scientist. Hanson stood his ground, but smiled sweetly. He understood the feelings caused by the Count's family and appreciated them. The girl finally heard what she was interested in. The Count mentioned the Tistan Empire, where he suggested the Count go to study at the academy. The couple was surprised, and moved at the same time, listening to the Duke and not believing his own ears that he would even help with transport for them to go. Daisy, meanwhile, holding a tray with a cup, opened her mouth in surprise, so he decided to send them to Tistan. When the Rappel still left, the girl tried to catch up with Duke Hanson, calling him because she had many questions for him. Returning to her, Dayon explained that he sent them there because their son would be the main character and pose a threat to Peta. Moreover, he will still want to study abroad. Duke Hanson was smiling, saying that nothing was impossible for him. He looked at Daisy, because he had beaten at least one of those 10. While trying on a toad that would match his outfit today, the Duke didn't even look back at Daisy, who was in shock. He informed her that he had taken all her things from the house and they had to be delivered to the palace. She really took it into her head, because she planned to return there and loved both her home and her restaurant very much. However, turning his head to the girl, the Duke looked at her questioningly, explaining that he did it so that she would not pay rent every month, even though she would not live there. But she, rolling her eyes, tried to explain that she would have nowhere to go if he released her, although she could not explain why this happened. Turning away, he began to adjust the buttons on his shirt, saying that he wouldn't call her his man, like at a ball in front of everyone, if he intended to cast her out. Continuing to be cute and looking at Daisy again, the Duke also mentioned the secret she knows and can tell others. Blushing and thinking about what he said, she considered this Duke's habit of calling those he hired his people for life to be bad. Daisy bowed to the boy, thanking him for his concern, who informed her that the luggage had not yet arrived, but that he would bring it as soon as the things were at the palace. Hardy stood in front of her, smiling as she reflected on the fact that he wasn't there at all in the original story. She had to raise her hands, saying that everything was fine, when the boy asked if everything was fine, because the girl also thought about the fact that Duke Hanson himself did not appear in their romance. But, having received an answer, the butler bowed, putting his hand to his chest in a gesture of respect, and announced that he would leave, since everything was fine. Looking at Hardy's trail, she thought that she had to be careful, because she didn't know many things, even though she had written a novel, and the boy had a strange glint in his eyes. But soon another butler, older and more respectable, brought her luggage, asking her if there were stones there, because, for a simple girl, she had too many things. The man threw her suitcase directly on the floor, which surprised her very much. He did not understand why he should be kind to her, and she looked in fear at her things, which fell to the floor with a loud thud. He looked at her calmly as he straightened his tie, saying that he couldn't wait for her to be freed and he could see it for himself. Looking at the disgruntled expression on the butler's face, Daisy could not understand why he was angry with her, since he had only brought her luggage. However, when she apologized to him, even though it was for nothing, a joyful Peta flew into the room, who immediately ran to Daisy, calling her name. That girl stopped when the man sat down next to her, saying that they had not seen each other for a long time and that she should show him her cute face. The girl looked at him in surprise, greeting him with a short, "Hello!" But the very next moment, her joy was gone as well. Peta looked ashamed and despondent at the butler, who scolded her that ladies should not walk the way she had just run. The child ran to Daisy, hiding behind her and clutching the skirt of her dress, because she felt protected in her. Looking guiltily at the man and clutching Daisy's skirt, Peta said that Hardy had let her run and told her she could. But he held his own, smiling, even though he embarrassed the child, because ladies don't behave like that and don't run, because it's indecent. The girl was shocked and angry, because Peta was a child, and the butler emphasized that she had put on those strange pants again, and that she should learn to choose the right things. The girl's eyes were wet, while the old man talked about the fact that she will not get married even at 30, and a woman's value ends after 21. Daisy was angry because, although he may have been a good butler, he had no right to talk to the Duke's daughter like that, and after the words that if they don't listen to him, the reputation of the family will fall below the plinth, Daisy was completely twisted by his anger. Folding her hands on her chest, she did not pay attention to Peta, who was holding on to her dress. She could not bear it. The girl wrote down what the butler generally carries. They began to argue, where the author defended the rights of the girl and the fact that it is unacceptable to say such nonsense to a child. Leaning towards Peta, he asked if she wanted to be as ignorant a woman as her nanny, which she would be if she continued to behave as she was now. Daisy lashed out at the man with renewed vigor, yelling at him for what he had said to the girl, specifically that she was only valuable until she was 21. They shouted at each other like that, finding out who was who, because everyone had their own truth. The butler laughed when he found out that she was a nanny, because she didn't do anything and couldn't even be present at banquets, which caused a questioning look from Daisy. But both turned at the sound of Peta's voice, surprised by her request. She asked them to stop fighting. The butler looked puzzled at the girl, because only now did he realize that she wasn't lying, and he asked if she was really a nanny. Daisy did not remain in debt, threatening that if she was released because of his fault, she would drag him down with her. She poked her finger to make sure. The butler blushed, but he listened silently to what Daisy told him, who recommended that he not say anything like that to the child again if he wanted to stay here and work. And the second condition, which she voiced, poking her finger in his chest, was that he would never again call her an ignorant woman, and added several threats. After finishing the conversation, she pointed to the exit, telling him to get out of her room as soon as possible. After clicking his tongue, he turned around and, huddled in his tailcoat, went to the exit under the watchful eyes of Daisy and Peta. Closing the door behind the butler, the girl thought about what he was like, because he didn't even think to apologize. Sitting down next to the girl, she tried to convince her that she wasn't angry, because that's exactly what she thought, now looking at her with huge, cute eyes. Holding the child's hand in hers, Daisy explained that she had nothing to apologize for, that it was not her fault that Deacon Peter was so horrible and that no one had the right to talk to her like that. Blushing, the girl was almost crying as she said that everyone around her was saying the same thing as the deacon about her short hair or the clothes she chose. Wiping her tears with her free hand, Peta said that she asked her father if she was really strange, because she had heard that from the guests, and then those guests did not come to them anymore. To Daisy's complete bewilderment, the girl said that she would not tell her father about what had happened here, because she would not see her again, but she would like to see Daisy. The author decided to distract the child, so she drew her attention, saying how they would do it. She asked him to tell her if such a situation arose again, instead of going to her father. The girl was surprised when the babysitter stuck out her little finger, telling her that no one would leave her, including Daisy, if she didn't tell her dad. They swore on their little fingers, and the author promised that he would definitely not go anywhere from her. Peta was so moved by the moment that she asked if the nanny wanted to touch her hair. She happily explained that it was because they shared a secret and became friends. The girl was happy that the child had returned to a good mood, so she could not hold back a sincere smile. Touching her hair, Daisy told Peta to call her you because they were friends, and that's how friends should talk to each other. The Duke was holding the girl in his arms when she saw the nanny, rejoicing at her arrival. But she thought about the fact that they were getting closer day by day, and the child trusted her more and more. Hanson put the baby in the hands of the girl, who was confused, saying that he had to work. She understood that raising a child alone is difficult. Pulling the nanny behind her, Peta really wanted to show her something, although she didn't say what exactly. The child, with a twinkle in her eyes, pointed with her finger at the tree in the garden, where she had led the nanny who did not understand anything. There was a dry tree leaning to one side. There were no leaves on it, but there was a sign near it. While Peta was happy that they had come here, the girl did not understand why the tree was in such a state, raising her head and looking at the very top. Looking at the tree in awe, Peta said that her mother had planted it and had once told her that this place would be special. While the girl played nearby, Daisy put her hand on the sick tree and thought that now she understood why it was being cared for even in this condition. Sitting down next to the child, who was holding a bouquet of flowers, on the grass, the nanny asked if this was really the secret place that the girl wanted to show her. Placing a flower in the nanny's hair, Peta said with a smile that Daisy understands her, even when she doesn't say anything. Saying that her heart was beating very fast, the girl did not want to tell why, turning and running away from Daisy to her hearty laugh. She was horrified to find Peta, who was covering herself from insects, calling the nanny. Grabbing the girl, the author ran away from the tree as fast as possible, worrying about the child's health. A swarm of bees flew behind them, stinging Daisy, and she called to Hardy, the butler, to help them, still keeping her pace. By Pierretta's bed, whose hand was bandaged, the Duke stood listening to the doctor remove the stinger and that everything was in the past. Bowing her head and apologizing to Hanson, the girl cried because she had to hug the girl tighter so that no bee could get to her. The Duke turned to face her, listening to her in silence and noticing something. He asked her to remove the blanket she had draped over her shoulders, and when Daisy refused, he loomed over her, resting his hand on the wall near her face, and repeated his order once more. Her shoulder was covered with bee stings. The skin was red, and there was no living spot on her shoulders. But she fell upon the Duke, holding fast to his shirt, while he, turning his head towards the door, ordered Hardy to call the doctor. She woke up when it was already dark in her room, seeing the Duke at the door. The girl wanted to get up, but he clicked his tongue and said that there was no need. Sitting beside her on the bed with a tray of medicine, he excused himself and began to dab the bites as the doctor had instructed, his thin fingers touching the delicate skin on her shoulder. Closing her eyes after his apology, because she was hurt because of Peta, she thought that she should be fired because she didn't take care of Peta. Standing by the bed, the Duke looked at the girl and remembered what the doctor had said when he pulled the stinger out of her shoulder. Everything could end tragically, and he did not understand how she could even run to the palace. Covering her with a blanket, Hanson told her not to worry. A doctor would be called, and she would be looked after until she recovered. When he walked out the door, he knew what had to be done. Turning to Hardy, the Duke of Hanson ordered the gardeners to be summoned.
Recovering, they stood in the garden, the Duke and Daisy a little behind, as Pierretta sobbed over her tree, which she loved so much.
Lifting his daughter from the grass, The Duke tried to explain that the tree was dangerous and had to be removed because she was injured. But the child objected. Daisy only listened in surprise to what Hanson said about her, addressing her daughter. He asked if she had seen the shoulders of the nanny, who was badly hurt by the bees that lived in the tree. Mortified and crying, she dropped her father and ran to Daisy to hug her and start apologizing. Sitting down, she began stroking the girl's hair, saying that everything was fine and that it was not her fault. Peta put her arms around Nanny's neck while she gently held her, trying to convince her that it wasn't her fault and that it was okay. They were both surprised when the Duke said that was enough and that it was time for them to go to breakfast. With tears in her eyes, the girl went away, saying that she hated her uncle. A surprised Daisy and a devastated Hanson looked after her. Daisy was carrying a tray of food to place by Peta's bed, who was under the covers and not about to come out. But all the goodies took a back seat when she heard what the child said. The tree was important to her. Now the author was not smiling and just stood guiltily next to the bed. She felt many emotions when she heard that the girl now had only her. It was embarrassing for her. Hugging the girl who said that they should run away and live together, the author thought only that everything did not go according to plan.
Hanson folded his hands, calling a babysitter and saying his kid kept calling him uncle.
Bowing his head, he closed his eyes and exhaled. He had no idea that the girl knew about that tree. Herzog said her offense would last a long time. He was once again getting no attention from Peta, failing again when he tried to offer her something while she turned to Daisy. One day, unable to bear it, the Duke took the child and, putting her on his lap, asked her for forgiveness for cutting down a tree that was very important to her. Hanson went on to say that he loved that tree just as much, but both she and Nanny were much more important to him, and he didn't want them to get hurt again. Embracing Peta, all in tears, he offered her to buy a new tree and plant it together so that they would have their own memories. But he was devastated and disappointed again. Peta refused him, saying that he did not understand anything and that the tree would never replace the one that had been cut down. While she was hugging the girl, Daisy was upset because she saw the expression on the Duke's face, who was almost in tears after his daughter's words. After Peta fell asleep, Daisy stood in the Duke's study and asked him to listen to her because she had some ideas about what was going on. Recalling what she and the baby went through, Daisy confidently said that the girl needed a place or a person so that she could switch and calm her soul. Hanson listened attentively, turning his face to the girl who offered to introduce Peta to a girl of the same age who lives not far from the palace. She remembered the shiny hair the color of wheat and the son of the already grown-up girl she was talking about now. She was talking about the secondary heroine of the novel. Convincing the Duke, the author was sure that communication would be beneficial, especially since this is a girl, and Peta will soon not remember the tree. She began to tell that according to the plot of the novel, they could not become friends because there was a boy who loved Peta so much that he isolated her from everyone. The Duke, looking at the nanny, thought that she was serious because she said that they would kill 2 birds with 1 stone, and there would be no more problems with the male character in the future. But the children of aristocrats do not run with friends. He asked what would happen if they didn't become friends, because his daughter would be left with a broken heart at such a young age. Daisy was unwaveringly sure. They would find a common language, because that girl is quiet and modest, and she would be interested with someone as energetic as Peta. Rejoicing at the new story for the girl, she told her name, Rodison, who was the second daughter of Marquis Francoff. Hardy, holding the envelope in his hand, was surprised, but smiling. He said that he thought that the Duke would never invite strange children to Peta's birthday. And while Daisy was smiling and happy about this decision, the Duke was serious and interrupted the boy, who was rambling about how glad he was that the Duke had changed his mind and that Milady would talk to other children. Approaching her father and Nanny, Peta asked the latter where exactly Hardy had gone. Thinking that she might disappoint the girl if the guest did not appear, she sat down opposite the girl and said that the butler had gone on business and would be back soon. She continued to ignore her father, saying that even if Hardy was late, it didn't matter, because the most important thing was how Daisy was with her on her birthday. Hanson, devastated by the girl's neglect, called to her, holding out her hands and offering to go to her father's arms. But she only turned her back to him, again burying her face in her nanny's legs. Sitting in Hanson's study that evening, Daisy shared the impression that the girl's disappointment in him was growing. But she began to talk about the Pumpkin Palace, which they had talked about when they were walking in the garden. But he did not listen to her, all absorbed in his thoughts. He wondered aloud if he had really been right to ask the girl to call him daddy, and the author now recalled that she herself had a bad influence on his relationship with his daughter, because he followed Peta, who, in turn, followed the nanny, seeking her attention. Now she had to remember everything the girl said, write it down, and tell it to the Duke, and she was sure that she would die sooner than they reconciled. Daisy finally got the Duke's attention by standing next to him and bending down a little and recounting what she had learned while working at the nursery school. They were sitting at the table next to each other when Pierrette ran into the dining room, immediately heading for the nanny. Standing next to her, she asked with curiosity and a twinkle in her eye how Daisy slept, not even paying attention to her father. Returning to the girl, she replied that she slept perfectly, simultaneously recalling the whole plan of yesterday. Once, one of the children's mothers said that you should hold the father's hand if the child is offended by him. In this way, she will also want to hold the father's hand, and in a few days, everything will be back to normal. The Duke was sitting straight when the girl turned to him, asking if Peta would like to say hello to his father, taking his hand. It was seen that Hanson, covering his mouth with his free hand, clenched into a fist, blushed embarrassingly at the fact that the nanny was holding his hand. He awkwardly turned his head to the side, and Daisy, herself red, mentally shouted at him, because they agreed not to be embarrassed. However, the girl watched with interest. Returning to the girl, Daisy asked if she wanted to say hello to her father, to which she said good morning. But after a second, they both looked puzzled in the direction of Peta, who simply left the table without saying anything. She said that one should not give up and that the girl just had to adapt, clenching her fist for her own confidence in her words. But Daisy was worried about something else. The Duke was still holding her hand, not even trying to let go. The girl looked at the nanny, asking why she couldn't stay, because she had gone on business. To the Duke's and Daisy's surprise, Pierrette took that purse and ran away with it, holding it close to her, because she thought the nanny wouldn't leave like that. Hanson turned to his daughter, saying that it was very rude to take someone else's things. Standing in the hall, she understood that everything was not according to plan again, because the Marquis's family had received an answer and they had to sneak out of the castle before Peta saw them. The little girl, although she gave the bag, folded her hands on her chest and, turning back, said that she hated her uncle. Daisy crouched next to her, putting her hand on the girl's hair and saying with a smile that she would be back very soon. Hearing the words that the nanny never lies to her, the Duke closed his eyes and exhaled. He was again broken by his daughter's behavior. They were sitting at the Marquise's house. The Duke was drinking tea, while Daisy listened with a smile and reverence to the Marquise, holding a plate of cake in her hand. The couple bowed to the Duke, justifying their absence from the ball that he organized not so long ago. They explained why they could not come. And while the Duke said that the reason for the visit was the question of whether their daughter would come to his child's birthday, Daisy was already holding an envelope in her hands, showing it to the couple. Grabbing the envelope from the girl's hands, the Marquis and his wife looked at the invitation with reverence, and the Marquise even put her hand to her mouth in surprise. Duke Hanson listened calmly to what the couple assured them they would be, squinting at them and at Daisy, who was sitting a little closer to the couple. He called to the children who were now standing in front of the Duke, an older son named Pat and a younger son named Rentley. Marquise tearfully began to shed a tear, saying that time flies so fast as she watches her children and how they grow. They were both shocked, because they thought they were having a girl, but now they only saw 2 sons. Everything did not go according to plan again. The Duke turned to the Marquise, saying that he had come to see their daughter because he did not want to make a lot of noise, because he was inviting someone to his daughter's birthday for the first time. When she was brought, Reconciling timidly fell behind her nanny's dress, greeting the guests and looking at them with wide-open eyes. The Duke, seeing the girl, smiled, and Daisy was delighted with the appearance of little Reconciling, who was incredibly cute. Daisy was smiling along with Dion as he invited the girl and his daughter's birthday party and assured her that it would be fun, even though she would be the only guest. The girl could not believe that she could go somewhere without her brothers, which she asked again to make sure. The author said that this is true, and she is sure that the girls will get along and that they have prepared a lot of goodies in the honor of the holiday. The girl picked up Daisy's little finger with her little finger, who promised that they would have fun and said that she would be happy to go to the holiday. When they returned, Peta immediately found herself in the girl's arms, hugging her, rejoicing at her return. The nanny asked with a smile if Peta had behaved well. The Duke stood behind, completely surprised, because the daughter kissed her nurse on the cheek, saying that she had fulfilled the promise she had made to her. Daisy put the girl on the floor, telling her to go kiss Daddy, but she made a bow of her mouth, saying that now Daddy had Daisy to kiss him. They were both confused by what the little one said, not understanding what she was talking about. They looked at each other embarrassed, but decided to play the play to the end so that Peta would finally stop being angry with her father. Both were too close to each other, blushing and embarrassed by the minimal distance between them and having to kiss each other. Having dinner with his nanny and daughter, the Duke couldn't help but be happy. Peta kept asking who they invited to her birthday, because for the first time she would receive guests. Daisy, who folded her hands in front of herself, could not help but be happy, saying that soon my lady will have a friend. Both admired the expression on the girl's face, who still could not believe that this was her first holiday, which she would celebrate with a friend and not with her father. But the fun quickly passed. She asked how they would have fun because they were seeing each other for the first time. Daisy assured that she was sure that the two girls would quickly get along and they would have something to do and talk about. Moreover, her dad took care of the invitation so that both of them would have memories of this day. The little boy even got up from the chair, leaning on the table, when he heard about the new furniture that his father had ordered and about the cake that the famous confectioner had baked. The girl wanted both to see the cake and to decorate the hall with pumpkins, but she came to her senses and again behaved coldly with her father, trying to hide her joy behind an insult. Hardy leaned over to the Duke, who was smiling happily, bringing him back to reality, and with one appeal reminding him of things that couldn't wait. Returning to Daisy, he told her he was counting on her. But he stopped immediately when he felt his daughter hugging his leg and turned to face her and the nanny. Hiding behind the nanny's skirt, Peta said that it wasn't her and that she just confused Dad with Daisy. The girl, having called the nanny and waited until she sat down in front of her, immediately hugged her to the complete surprise of Daisy herself and asked her to give these hugs to her father. The Duke and the butler looked at this scene in bewilderment, not understanding what was happening. The child was cunning, saying that she would not have the courage to hug her father herself and asked the nanny to help her out. Blushing, Daisy didn't know how to do it all, so she began to stammer what her daughter had told him to be careful. But the very next moment, she found herself in the Duke's arms, not understanding what was happening and blushing even more. Both embarrassed, they opened their arms when the Duke said it was okay to refuse to do something she didn't like. Still upset, the author began to defend herself, saying that she never said she didn't like it. A shocked Duke stood in front of her as Peta turned away, looking smug that her plan to set them up was working. While Peta climbed the steps to the bed, Daisy scolded herself for what she had said to the Duke, now wondering why she blurted it out and that her tongue was always her enemy. Turning her gaze to the child, the author asked if Peta could make his father not sad. She, looking with big, sweet eyes, asked if he was very upset, clutching the blanket and hiding half of his face in it. The girl jumped on the bed, burning with the idea of going to her father's room and wishing him sweet dreams, to Daisy's complete surprise. The girl was satisfied, because now Peta stopped taking offense at the Duke, and she finally went further in the plan for their reconciliation. The little girl flew to the door opened by the nanny, attracting the attention of her father and joyfully calling him. Hanson stood up, leaning on the table and not believing his eyes. It was really a daughter. Peta, sitting on her father's arms, apologized to him, because she never wanted to hurt him. Hugging the girl and holding her to him, the Duke also apologized, because he should not have cut down the tree that was so important to her. And then Peta joyfully announced that she wanted them to sleep as three tonight, as a sign of reconciliation. Both of their eyes nearly popped out of their sockets when they heard what the little one had to offer. Hugging the toy pumpkin, the girl was content to lie on the edge of the bed and feel Daisy's embrace. She remembered the child's face when she asked her father, even shedding a tear, and knew that they both became weak when they saw her tears. Daisy was furious, speechless, as Peta called out to her father, telling him to turn his face to them, even though his back was now. Dion lay staring at the wall and felt himself blush when he heard Daisy say that everything was fine. Daisy felt the Duke's face turn, causing her eyes to widen, but she didn't see him looking at her daughter with his hand on his head. The girl quickly fell asleep in the nanny's arms while she lay there, afraid to move. The Duke was awake when she called him, apologizing to her for being upset by his child's whims.
But, smiling, the nanny replied that everything was fine as if it was not clear that she was embarrassed.
She asked what the girl's mother was like, and immediately told him not to answer if it was important to him to talk about it. The Duke put one finger of his hand on the girl's hand, a gesture to calm her down. He was looking at the back of her head with a completely different look than when they first met. He told her that she had nothing to worry about and that it was normal to be interested in such things. It turned out that her mother was his own sister. He remembered how he and his sister had lost their parents, and that each relative had his own goals and they all called them to him. Herzog recalled that the sister became the head of the family in her 20s, and they had a difference of 7 years. He was younger. But this did not prevent him from protesting against his sister taking over his father's duties. He said that he was a rebel, although he wouldn't be close to Peta. Upset, he said that there were many things for which, unfortunately, he would not be able to repay his sister, who had done everything for him. The Duke was sure that his entire life would not be enough to pay him back. Stroking the little girl's sweet cheeks, Hanson said that she was his sister's last request. He recalled once handing his daughter over to Daisy, saying that before meeting her, he thought the two of them would live happily ever after, but Daisy corrected that, and he thanked her for doing so much more. After the Duke's confession, she wanted to leave, saying that my lady had already fallen asleep, but he only hugged her tighter, saying that her daughter might wake up. Daisy put her fist to her mouth, embarrassed. The girl thought about what the look on the Duke's face would be if she turned to face him right now. After all, he could hear the beating of her heart, because he leaned his chest against her back. He said he knew what it was when she tried to explain. Blushing, Daisy began to explain what the matter was and why her heart was pounding so hard. But they both widened their eyes when they heard the sound of gases and stopped talking. The girl convinced that it was not her, but my lady, to be honest. The next evening, they were both broken and almost asleep sitting in the Duke's study. When Hardy asked if the two of them were in pain, the Duke looked through his fingers in disbelief at the butler, who said something about the same symptoms, asking what it meant. Hardy said it sounded a lot like baby fatigue syndrome, to which the Duke replied that anything was possible. Hanson looked questioningly at the shelf with alcohol. He did not remember the bottle that was there among the others. Taking the bottle and glasses, Hardy said that it was a gift from Baron Solfino and that everyone should relax a bit and spend time with the adults. While Daisy was wondering, the Duke folded his arms over his chest and looked bored at the boy. Too predictable. The three of them quietly drank alcohol, which brought out from Daisy that it is very important to find an approach to milady. But Peta, who flew into the room, immediately said that she wanted to sleep with the three of them, like yesterday. Daisy choked on the alcohol, spitting it out in surprise. Wiping her mouth with her sleeve, Daisy said she couldn't, immediately dousing herself with paint. Sipping his cup, the Duke assured him that he could not, because he did not plan to go to bed, because he still had a lot of work to do. Folding her hands on her chest, the mother told her father that he should sleep, because a person needs more sleep as he grows older. He grabbed his daughter, hugging him tightly to the soft laughter of Hardy and Daisy, as the girl protested because her father smelled of alcohol and his stubble was prickling. Mala quickly climbed into the nanny's arms, saying that they are adults and they need to control the amount they drink. In general, the Duke grew serious, saying that he thought his daughter liked Daisy a lot more than he did. And while the girl thought it was because she had mastered the nanny's magic, Peta told her father that he had to like Daisy too. And then, the little one said that she would not sleep either, and looking with her cute eyes, offered the author to play. When everyone agreed to play, the little girl ran after the threads and cards, leaving the nanny confused because she did not understand what the cards and threads were for. Sitting with a box of cards, the girl explained that whoever wins gets a card with a punishment. Mala was holding a card with a bear with a heart drawn on its cheek, and Daisy wondered what that could mean. But Peta quickly kissed the nanny on the cheek, surprising her with what the card meant. When the nanny understood the rules, everyone was ready to play, and she herself was determined to win decisively. Daisy was angry because she couldn't play at all, and the others made fun of her, which made her even more angry. She burst into tears with anger. Trying to justify herself, the girl said that she was playing for the first time, but for the Duke, the game clearly does not look as simple as he wants to show. Crossing his arms over his chest, Hanson said that he had never tried to play either, but he would definitely do much better. They were gambling and drunk, so they argued with each other, not noticing that Peta yawned again and again. Both Duke and Daisy had heard that Hardy had gone to babysit, so they didn't get distracted by playing until Duke chose the orange card for the babysitter. She looked at the card she pulled out, not believing her eyes and blushing not only from alcohol, but also from what she had to do. Now both of them opened their eyes, because now the Duke also knew which card he told them to pull out. There was a drawn teddy bear with a heart and mouth. Daisy jumped off the couch saying that was enough for today, and the Duke agreed without looking at her, still holding the card in his hand. But immediately her head became dizzy, and she fell on the Duke, resting her hand on his chest, while he held the girl with both hands and looked into her eyes. She began apologizing, saying that she would quickly clean up all the broken glass. Propping his head with his hand, the Duke smiled smugly as he asked if she was going to run away, never accepting the penalty of losing. And then the girl was covered. She realized that Kashtanchik, as she called Peta about herself, was a provocateur. It was reflected on her face. But she always kept her word. Therefore, taking the Duke's face in her hands, she was going to fulfill what she had lost. The next morning, the Duke watched Daisy playing with Peta, drawing something and paying no attention to him. At breakfast, Hardy asked when they went to bed, and the Duke asked aloud, though to himself, for he did not remember. And after that, the girl rushed out of the dining room, saying that she had already had enough and needed to run errands. Sitting on the table, the Duke folded his arms in front of him and thought that Daisy was avoiding him, and he really needed to talk to her about the letter he had received from their doctor. Hanson exhaled noisily, folding his arms over his chest, and remembering that the doctor had made a perfume that would scare away the bees, and he still had to examine the girls, and the answer was to be given that very day. The Duke put his hands in his pockets and, standing in the study, thought about the fact that he must take care of everyone who liked Peta, including Daisy, who could not be caught for a conversation. The girl awkwardly turned her head to the side, not wanting to meet the Duke's eyes as he stood in front of them, drawing both of their attentions. He saw that expression again, looking at Nanny and wondering if she really was so disgusted with him that she wouldn't even look at him. And again, she ran away somewhere, not wanting to talk and pretending that she had a lot of work to do. Hanson was angry and very determined to catch Daisy for a chat, for there was no delay. He followed the girl into the wine cellar, which surprised her. She did not think that the Duke would follow. He asked, smiling, albeit a little forced, if she was busy. She wanted to run away again, saying that she had business with Hardy, but the Duke put his hand on the wine barrel behind the girl, blocking her way. Looking her up and down, the Duke said that the butler would go on business, because he himself had sent him to solve several matters. He said they needed to talk right now and prevent this from happening in the future, talking about bees and still hovering over the girl when she blurted out that it would never happen again. Frowning, he still didn't understand how she could swear by her name that she wouldn't be stung by bees again. Wrapping herself in a blanket and feeling awkward, she blurted out that yesterday was a mistake and she just got too drunk, not even listening to what the Duke started to say about perfume. But when it finally began to dawn on Hanson what she was talking about, the girl was already running for the exit, remembering the kiss and confusing the Duke, who was looking after her. He remembered how she had accepted her punishment for losing last night and kissed him because she always kept her promises. The Duke called to the girl, asking her to wait and saying that he was talking to her about the bees and not about yesterday. Daisy, Peta, Hanson, and Hardy were riding in the carriage, and two of them were feeling rather awkward. The Duke was staring out the window, oblivious to what was going on inside the carriage, and Daisy could only think that she couldn't breathe as she looked at him. That nanny quickly turned her attention to Peta, who was very happy because she was going somewhere together with Daisy for the first time. Once inside the store, Daisy's mouth dropped in surprise because it was huge and had almost everything in the world. Now they both watched as the little one dragged Hardy to pick out the decorations for the upcoming birthday party, leaving them alone. The Duke and the girl were confused and unhappy, and Hardy, meanwhile, was telling the girl that he didn't think she would need his company, because she hardly ever paid attention to him. Blushing a little when they were alone, the Duke glanced down at Daisy, who was standing a step ahead. The girl was handed the box when the Duke announced that he had something for her. The man said that he managed to repair everything. After opening the box, the author looked at her pendant, which the Duke had previously broken, not believing her eyes. It was intact. Hanson said with a smile that there was no need to thank him, because he had no right to break something that belonged to her, for which he apologized to her. The girl was embarrassed, holding the box, but now because she herself had to apologize to the Duke, because she was running away from him and it was very childish. A gray-haired man with a beard appeared on the threshold, who interrupted her, joyfully and loudly, saying that he had seen a familiar carriage, recognizing the Duke of Hanson himself. When the shop assistant tried to send the guest away, the Duke said that it was not necessary to do so, stopping her, because he knew very well who was standing in front of him. He and the Count shook hands, smiling broadly and talking about their own, because they had known each other for many years. After hearing the name Santorini, the author carefully looked at the scene unfolding before her eyes, and now remembered how this name appeared in the novel in general. A friend invented a handsome and dangerous thief and guild leader with incredible charisma and love for blue alcohol. Grabbing the Duke's hand, the girl dragged him into the cell because she had to tell what she had just remembered. She didn't even ask him, confusing him with where she was dragging him. The author was flying in her thoughts, mixed with the aroma of the Duke's perfume, thinking that she had no idea how exactly she would know what kind of perfume he had. A little puzzled, the Duke asked what had happened and whether the girl was going to play hide-and-seek with him again, like before. But the next moment, he was looking at the girl in surprise, not believing his ears, and asking if she was sure that the grandson of the Count of Santorini was the main male character. And now it was her turn to be surprised, because the Duke said that the Earl had never had a wife and had no heirs, but had won his title in battle. Hanson shook his head, rejecting the bastard option, because the Earl was an honest man and always took responsibility for his own actions and for the person with whom he was in a relationship. Daisy, putting her hand to her face, thought, because she clearly remembered this fact. However, she said that she could be wrong. But the Duke thought about it, putting his hand to his face in the manner of a girl and saying that they need to know for sure, so they need to check everything that is possible and that the Count has. After a few seconds, the storeroom door opened and a surprise saleswoman and a butler stood on the threshold, asking what they were doing in the storeroom together. Sitting by Peta's bed, who was sleeping sweetly, the author chastised herself for again getting into a double situation and again with the Duke when they were caught in the closet. She decided to remove all the toys that the girl had left in the room before going to sleep, so that there would be no harm. There were teddy bear cards on the floor, like the ones they used to play the kissing game with, but there were no pictures on them. Sitting in the middle of the room, she understood that the cards were strange, but she couldn't find what exactly was bothering her. Daisy finally realized what was wrong and that it was yesterday's box of cards, but there were no hearts drawn. Remembering the meeting with the co-authors, the girl also remembered the fact that they made Pierretta a gray cardinal, and now sat, unable to believe that it was the child who drew and erased the heart. The next day, the mother brought a drink she had made herself and asked Daisy to try it and tell if Rhodison would like it. Clutching the saucer in her hand, the nanny tipped the cup, thinking that she should praise the girl, even if the drink was tasteless. The Duke, who heard the well-deserved praise, smiled and said that Rhodison should be liked too, because Peta had worked very hard to make this drink. The nanny looked at the girl with a sweet smile, thinking that she had tried incredibly hard because she was really looking forward to Rhodison's arrival. The girl refused another glass of juice, saying that according to research, only one should be drunk, so she offered the Duke and the nanny to interrogate her. Hearing that his daughter was going to clean her room, Hanson asked if she really started to grow up and began to talk about nostalgia for her when she was little. But Daisy did not share this mood. It was all strange, and she thought about what exactly the little girl was doing and what she was aiming for. She thought about the girl and the juice, which she refused in complex sentences. But before that, she behaved like a child, composing only simple and short ones. And while the Duke was praising his daughter, Daisy realized another important thing. The two of them are the objects of Peta's attention. And then something else immediately came to her. The little girl made her a stepmother, trying to bring her closer to her father. As the girl left the dining room, Daisy slammed her fists on the table, drawing the Duke's attention, who asked what was wrong. After catching the little one, Hardy entered the room, who was breaking out. He informed Hanson that the accountant wanted to see him about last year's taxes. Without kicking any more, the little girl hung on the butler's arm, thinking that Hardy was only making things more difficult because her father had now gone on business. Now they were sitting in the closet, where Peta had dragged them, because she had decided to play hide-and-seek. The Duke apologized, and Daisy, as usual, said that everything was fine and smiled. Hanson decided to waste no time and talk about their secret when they were alone, telling them that there was no one and no guilds with the name Santorini. She was surprised and a little confused because the Count did not have an illegitimate son, but what the Duke said after that made the girl turn her head towards him. He smiled smugly, propping his head with his hand, for he said he had learned of the Earl's secret meeting and the time and place where it would take place.
And now they were arguing because Daisy had asked where the meeting was going to be, but the Duke wasn't going to share that information. The girl did not give up, saying that she could recognize someone because she also knows other names.
But Hanson, resting his hand on the wall of the cupboard, leaned towards her, looking straight into her eyes and saying that he knew how dangerous it could be, and that one should not indulge in such things. They would have continued to argue, if not for a voice that made them glance at the closet door, behind which the question was heard where they could hide. It was Hardy, who was laughingly trying to find the Duke and the girl's nurse, who was now running after him and trying to lure him away from the closet by all lies. But when this did not happen, and he almost opened the closet door, Peta kicked him in the leg and the butler lost his balance, falling to the floor. Daisy and Dion were shocked to watch this scene because they saw everything in the gap that Hardy managed to open the door. Folding her hands and crying, the girl whimpered, saying that she was wrong, turning to her father. Duke was serious as he looked at his daughter and told her that she needed to go and apologize to Hardy. The author held on, clenching her fist and remembering the words of the Duke, who said that she could not condone everything that a child does. And the child was sorry, even though she was guilty. Closing the windows in her room, Daisy thought about going to bed early after taking a bath and relaxing a bit. Hardy and Peta were sitting on the steps, talking about something, looking at the garden in front of the palace. The girl allowed the butler to touch her hair, which he did, causing her to smile widely. Daisy couldn't believe her eyes because Hardy managed to bond with the child in just half a day. She was glued to the window, watching. A few hours ago, the little girl stood in front of the butler, whining and apologizing for hitting him, but he only smiled at her. He sat next to her, smiling widely and saying that everything was fine and that he was not in pain, while Peta cried, covering her face with her sleeve. But the question of why she always tries to leave the Duke and Nanny alone made her stop crying and look up at Hardy. She began to say that she liked Daisy and that no one loved her like she did, as Hardy asked if the girl was sick of spending time with the babysitter. But Hardy, supporting his hand with his hand, said that he liked Daisy a lot too, smiling a little dreamily. With tears in her eyes, Peta began to say that Daisy and Dad should get married, not even considering the option of Nanny being with Hardy, but he reassured her, blushing a little and showing 2 fingers beside him, because he convinced her that he was on the side of my lady and that he also wanted this wedding. After praising that the girl had done a lot to bring these two together, she sat down on the step and began to tell that she did everything so that they spent as much time as possible together. But the little girl, clenching her fist, said that it was difficult for her because Daisy was always going somewhere. Sitting down next to him, Hardy surprised the girl because he said that this was possible because she was using the wrong methods. Copying the old butler, Caperti raised his finger and began to say in a scholarly tone that it was important to develop the relationship between a man and a woman. He said that it was important that they liked each other, but now neither he nor Peta knew if the Duke liked Daisy, and vice versa. Folding her hands in her lap, the girl did not understand how Daisy could not like her, because she liked her from the first moment of meeting. The boy, blushing, said that it was indeed so, thinking about his own sympathy for the nanny. The girl was upset because Hardy was right, and even if her father likes the nanny, they don't know if she likes the Duke. The butler was surprised when Milady asked if he could help her. She asked him to help and make Daisy like her dad, because she and Dad are both adults and he can do something. But he finally came up with something, while the little girl was hysterical that he was of no use to him. He told how they would act. Dvoretsky said that their conversation should be kept secret and act very carefully, so that no one suspects anything. Peta and Hardy orchestrated the union, rejoicing in it and calling it the Duke's marriage project. Mala was very happy that now she had a friend, as he called himself. The girl jumped to her feet, rejoicing and saying that now they must take vows to each other as a sign of their friendship and union. The butler was shocked to see her bend down for him to touch her hair, saying that she had never let him before. He was very touched, smiling and blushing, when he heard that they were now friends and now it was possible. They both laughed as the boy stroked the girl's hair and told her that he hoped for her in their cause. The next day, when Daisy entered the room with a present, she was frightened because the little one immediately jumped at her with joyful screams. Mala, smiling, began to say that this was the day when her friend would come. Therefore, judging by everything, she was already awake, although this was exactly what the girl was hoping for when she sneaked into the room. Peta said that Dad also came in, but he couldn't sleep, that's a fool, but she slept very well. With a smile, the nanny said that you can't say that about Dad. The girl looked with interest at the box that Daisy brought, because the nanny brought her a present. Mala was delighted with the gift, smiling, happy, and waving her arms in delight when she opened the box. She was looking at the pumpkin cake, also in the shape of a pumpkin, that her nanny had given her with huge happy eyes. Everyone in the palace congratulated the girl, wished her all the best, and smiled, but the whole atmosphere came to nothing when the Marquises of Françoise appeared on the doorstep, bursting with gratitude for the invitation to the holiday. Duke and Daisy stood in the yard with stony faces, because they did not expect this at all and could not understand what was happening. Peta stood in confusion, holding on to her father's pants and watching what these people were saying. At first, the Marquis asked what kind of boy it was, and then he and his wife began showering the girl with compliments as soon as they found out that she was the Duke's daughter. And although her mother called her and said hello, Rhodison stood behind her magnificent skirt, still awkwardly greeting everyone, but she was not visible. Taking Peta, who was crying, into her arms, Daisy looked at the Marquises with displeasure because they somehow thought that their daughter's invitation included their arrival. But the Duke, looking at the invitation given by the Marquis, clearly said that it contained only the name of their daughter, when the two said that they had decided to propose because it was inconvenient to wait all the time in the carriage. Peta and Daisy followed Hanson in surprise, who said it was impolite to barge into someone else's party without an invitation. Standing beside their carriage with a smile, Dayon pointed to it and said they could go home. After her parents left, Rhodison smiled and became noticeably calmer, bowing and thanking her for being invited. Everyone looked at Pierrette in surprise because she greeted her very awkwardly, and Daisy even asked when she became so shy. Nanny Rhodison reminded her of the present she had prepared, and the girl immediately remembered it. Peta was holding a green box in her hands because it was her favorite color, which Desi Rhodison had previously told about. Then the nanny sat down and said that I should thank you. When the awkward thanks were said, the Duke took both girls in his arms, surprising them, and with a smile went inside with them. Rhodison opened her mouth in surprise and amazement, saying that the palace was very big. And Peta, holding the gift, was satisfied with herself and her home, albeit questioningly, but asserting that it was not bad. Gazing at the trail of the Duke with the children in his arms, Daisy suddenly remembered with a smile what these girls would be like when they grew up. She remembered that they were supposed to grow up cold towards each other, but now they were talking sweetly and laughing, so now that part of the story has definitely changed. They and the Duke together peered into the little window, worrying about how the holiday was going and whether the girls were all right. Peta laboriously brought a large jug, placing it on the table. She tried very hard to make the guest comfortable. Daisy remembered how she had told them not to interfere because she wanted to make the juice that they would be drinking throughout the party by herself and without any help. They tried to hear what the girls were talking about, but the Duke couldn't hear either, replying that they were too far away. Seeing that Peta was walking towards the door behind which they were standing, both rushed to the closet to hide in it. Mala opened the door to the room, knowing very well that Daddy and Daisy had been there recently, and she didn't like it. Sitting in the closet, the Duke told the news. Countess Lapel gave birth to a boy with red eyes, like his parents. This news comforted the author, who was delighted, saying that now the Count is studying even harder. In no way, Daisy still admitted that she was frightened when she learned that the Duke had invited them to his place. He glared at the girl, asking why she was so worried and whether she thought he was capable of doing something bad. With a smile, he put a finger to his face, saying that he thought they were already working well together, so she wouldn't have those thoughts. While she peed embarrassingly, the Duke said that he had not thought about what she would be going through and promised that he would tell her everything next time. He decided to talk about the guild meeting, and Daisy squealed when she found out it was tomorrow. It was unexpected for her. Looking at the girl, the Duke smiled, although he said that the meeting was so fast, although the situation was not the most pleasant. To the girl's complete surprise, the Duke reached out and smoothed her hair, saying that he was worried about her when he saw her agitation. Hanson looked at her intently, saying nothing, and the girl wondered whether the Duke was her. She didn't finish that thought, because she opened the closet with a loud cry of, "Daisy!" forcing her to quickly push the Duke as far as possible. Hanson heard the girl scream, turning his attention to her and ignoring Peta's accusations for the time being. It was important to him to know if the girl was okay. But the little one was the only one who didn't feel sorry for the nanny. Crossing her hands on her chest, she declared that she had to, because she disobeyed and eavesdropped. The nanny and the gouliam on her head, and the puzzled father watched as Peta led Rodison to the Hall of Mirrors, which had been specially decorated for the holiday. Everyone who worked in the palace dressed festively, and now, standing in front of the door, congratulated Milady on her birthday. The author was impatiently waiting for her daughter to open the door, because although she helped decorate the hall, she still did not see its final appearance. Daisy and Rodison both opened their mouths in surprise, because everything was decorated with pumpkins, which the girl loved so much she had a lot of them. Placing her hands on her sides, Peta, pleased with herself, said that she had planned all this for a very long time. However, the author was distracted from the decor, seeing something that surprised her. She did not understand how this was possible. The Duke stood with a smile and one hand in his pocket, and behind him was something huge and covered with a white cloth. After a few moments, the girl looked at the fountain, which was entwined with pumpkin vines and the very small pumpkins made of pure gold. Without wasting time, the girl started drinking from the fountain, but Peta was the first. Daisy tried to pull the girls by the collars, saying that they were going to have a lot of mouth sores if they continued to drink from there. Mala scooped water from the fountain with her hands, asking the nanny to try it herself. But she was interested, asking herself if it really wasn't just water there. As soon as she tried it, the author was delighted with the taste, because it was refreshing and sweet, and the taste was very familiar. And while the Duke and Hardy were talking, because it was the butler who designed the fountain, the girl was wiping her mouth and thinking that there was really not water, but pumpkin juice. Dion said that at first he wanted to build an artificial pond in the garden, but abandoned the idea for reasons of hygiene. Meanwhile, Rodison was looking at her friend from below, saying that she was very cool because she climbed to the first tier of the fountain and told her to climb up as well. Mala, rejoicing, began to blow out the candle on the pumpkin cake to the joyful shouts of those present. On this day, the child was incredibly happy, always smiling, and never stopped having fun. Watching her, the nanny thought she was seeing a child like this for the first time. Holding hands outside, the girls said goodbye to each other, and Peta said that she would put their picture in a frame on the wall in the room, thanking them for an unforgettable day. Then, crying from Rodison's words and thanks, the little girl hugged her tightly. Dion and Daisy watched the scene with pleasure. They managed to organize this friendship, and it was beautiful. Lying in bed, she found the Duke and Daisy looking puzzled at the girl who said she wished the two of them could be as happy as she was today. Mala asked if Rodison had reached home, and then, if she would come again, and Daisy and the Duke answered with a smile that it would definitely happen. The Duke at that moment thought about his own, looking at his daughter, and Daisy thought she knew what he was thinking. The girl, holding on to her cape, understood one thing, and although everything in the palace became calm again after the holiday, she only got more nervous every day. Anxious for the guild meeting, she looked around as the Duke called out to her, drawing her attention. Hanson was standing in unusual clothes for him, a black shirt with ties and no frills, and he was looking at the girl. Holding Daisy by the cloak, he repeated to her once again not to go far from him, because everything could go wrong. But the author was sure. There is no need to worry, because she can come in handy, because she remembers many heroes of the novel. She remembered how they chose a name for the hero they were looking for. A mathematician friend had never been anywhere, so she came up with the names of her favorite places, and that made the task easier now. Having already got into the carriage, the girl thought about the fact that she did not know the appearance of the hero, but everything else, yes. It seemed to her that she would play the main role today. In the bar, where they were sitting with their hoods pulled up, everyone was having fun, drinking, and some even slept with their faces to the table. Adjusting his hood, Duke Hanson glared at the girl who had called him Daddy and asked her not to do that again. Herzog explained that the meeting was in a bar because the guard always bypasses all harmful places where swindlers could congregate. The Duke frowned as he caught the gaze, though she thought he stood out with his figure and black cloak because he didn't belong here. Daisy was angry because some people couldn't serve customers properly, so she turned back to see who it was, envying Ken Ho-won. She lashed out at the Duke, pointing a finger at the man who had recently been at their table, but he only pretended to be calm and gestured for her to be quiet. The author could not figure out, to the point of opening her mouth in surprise, what Ken Ho-won is doing here, and also serving beer. As she sat there with her hand on her cloak, the girl could tell that the Duke was worried about her. So many of his men were now sitting or working in the pub, so that he would be at ease for her safety. The girl saw an empty table where the company was sitting before. It was very strange for everyone to go to the toilet together. Hanson folded his arms in front of him, elbows on the table, and said that the meeting was about to begin. Thinking about the secret place, she remembered something, which she shared now, whispering almost in Hanson's ear. There are stairs in the bar that lead to the basement. Daisy began to tell me that she knew about those stairs because she had been here once with Polyp, and he flew down them because he was very drunk. The Duke thoughtfully began to say that he did not think that he and that boy were so close as to walk in such places together. It was obvious that he was jealous. That girl, as soon as she understood what he was getting at, immediately began to tell that they were here with other employees of the bar on vacation. But their little argument stopped as soon as they saw the boy enter the basement. They both followed him with their eyes. Pulling up his hood, Hanson determined to follow, telling the girl to stay as close to him as possible. In the basement, the door to a small room was open, from where voices could be heard. This attracted their attention when Dion and Daisy went downstairs. Saying that he would go first, the Duke took the girl's hand to hold her close and keep her from getting into trouble. Several men were sitting at the table, and one of them in a red hood threw his legs on the table and folded his arms on his chest, behaving like a master. The girl looked thoughtfully into the gap, asking herself if that man was the head of the guild, but she still could not make out his face. The stranger looked at the paper in his hands, talking about a new order for the guild. Daisy watched and listened in frustration as the meeting was over, as everyone had been given their assignments, and she needed to learn more about the male character. Rolling her eyes and not believing her ears, she heard about the next meeting, putting together a puzzle in her head. She was happy to tell the Duke about the Maldives, because they were definitely connected with the name Santorini. They were right. The Duke frowned when he heard the question about the son of the guild head and his health, because it was the most interesting of this meeting. Taking off her hood, the young girl with blue hair said that everything was fine and that he was on the mend while she played with her scythes. But then she threw the knife right into the wall near the door, saying that if her son didn't come to his senses, she knew what she would do. Turning around, the Duke and the author began to walk away quickly so as not to be caught. Running after Hanson, the girl thought that she and Lapel were lucky, because this secondary character was damn scary and bloodthirsty. She did not manage to stop in time, crashing into the Duke's back and screaming. Everyone in the bar was looking directly at them, and some even crossed their arms over their chests, not taking their eyes off the two figures on the threshold of the basement. One of the men, looking quite intimidating, asked who they were and what they were doing in the basement. The girl was frightened, because now she understood that all these people were not ordinary visitors to the bar. But the fact that they remained silent did not please the strangers. Now they spoke louder, demanding answers. Remaining calm, the Duke rather rudely told the man to back off, threatening to rip off their hoods along with their faces if they didn't remove them themselves. He fixed his gaze on the Duke's figure. Hanson simply dropped his hood, revealing his face, while Daisy still stood in her cape behind him. When a roar went through the bar as everyone recognized the Duke of Hanson, the thug yelled for everyone to shut up. Now he was communicating better, but he said that now was not the time to ask the guild for something, because there were too many people in the bar, especially since the Duke clearly did not want to join the ranks of the guild. Keeping calm and smiling a little, the Duke said that the man was indeed right, but this place was not for him, and he only wanted to get to know the bar. But soon, both Daisy and the Duke were scared. The man threatened to spread rumors around the city that the Duke was secretly meeting a girl in this bar. Grimila held the author's shoulder, trying to take her away from the Duke, but he tightly squeezed her hand to prevent her from being taken away. The man hinted at a bribe so that his boyfriend would not be tipped off about this visit. Hanson remained true to his character, speaking calmly and saying that he was aware of the gossip to come, but he had come here on a civic mission. The owner of the bar did not give up, saying that the civic mission will be to help financially and that the guild does not give second chances to anyone. But the Duke, frowning, stood his ground. He said that he would spare the man's life if he let the girl go right now. Dion looked at the bar owner the way one usually looks at the dust on the road, realizing his superiority over the guild member. Enraged and having no help from the other boys in the bar, The bully roared and swung his fist at the Duke, who stood motionless in front of him. But nothing happened. The surprised owner of the bar looked back at the question about the Duke, and Daisy looked at the door with surprise. The Knights of Pontapils appeared in the bar and began arresting everyone in the main hall of the bar, telling everyone to move and get out. The Duke was a little bored, and calmly said that there were people in the basement, so that the Knights would take everyone from this place one by one. Hanson put one arm around Daisy as he walked out of the bar and past the crowd lining both sides of the road. Everyone whispered, not believing their eyes, because it was the Duke himself. But he only glanced at the author, who clearly felt uncomfortable. The girl's eyes widened when she heard about how she was being discussed, and that the Duke was hugging her too fondly, and maybe he had found the strength to live on. She could feel all those eyes directed at her and the Duke, feeling awkward about it. The carriage slowly drove away from the bar, leaving the place where the guild had recently gathered. Sitting in the carriage with his arms folded across his chest, the Duke asked if Daisy was too scared, and explained that the Knights had taken some time to arrive. Raising her hands, which were shaking before that, the girl said that she was glad, because everything worked out, and that she would never have thought that the help of the Knights would be needed. Smiling and a little embarrassed, the author admitted that she could not even imagine how powerful Duke Hanson is. Looking at her, he said only what he had mentioned before. He would never let her go where it was dangerous. Daisy's eyes widened as it dawned on her that the Duke had told the Knights where they were long before, but hadn't told her about them because he wanted to anticipate things that might get out of hand. And then the girl blushed, looking at him, when she realized that she was the person to whom the Duke had a special regard. Paint ran down the Duke's cheeks as he said without looking up that he wanted to talk about the bees and what happened in the wine cellar.
He was ashamed to admit it because he still didn't look at the girl, blushing and saying that he didn't remember anything from that night.
The Duke explained that he was talking about the bees when he said that this time she was in a fight and he might be next. They were both extremely embarrassed. The author was surprised by what he said because he said that he did not want her to think that he was unscrupulous, especially her. She thought that this was very unusual for her because before a kiss was the beginning of a relationship for her. But now everything was different. Thinking that this would be better, Daisy smiled awkwardly, telling the Duke to forget everything that happened and apologize for everything. He cleared his throat awkwardly, asking why exactly he had to forget everything, because he didn't want to do it. Daisy couldn't believe what she was thinking. He never kissed because he was busy raising a child. But she was sure. Kashtanchik definitely influenced it. The next day, the girl thought with shock that the mother of the guild leader worked as a therapist for the Alp mercenaries. While she thought that her friend, judging by everything, really wanted to go on vacation, the Duke calmly and with an aristocratic manner continued his story. But Daisy did not understand why father and son did not turn to Count Santorini for help, because he had connections and money. Hanson was sure that they simply did not know that they were the Earl's relatives, which is why it did not happen. The author was sure that the leader of the guild knew about the relationship, because in the future his son will be the leader of the Santorini Guild, which means that his father knows about family ties. Tapping a finger on his forearm and folding his hands on his chest, the Duke said that one should be on the alert, because the leader could take advantage of these connections. She pondered what the Duke had said, since the Earl had earned the title for his merits in battle, so being related to the guild leader would raise a lot of questions from the public. Looking at the author, Hanson said that he would not trust in any matter anyone who was in any way involved in the affairs of the guild. After the Duke's words, Daisy thought amusedly about showing up at the mansion when she was accused of theft while he reached for the kettle. Seeing this, the girl said that she would pour it for him, reaching for the teapot. However, the Duke said it wasn't for him and pointed to Daisy's empty cup, surprising her. While Hanson poured her tea, the girl thought about the fact that she had seen the Duke do something just for Peta before, and it confused her. Hearing that the Earl loved children and helped the orphanage after receiving the title, she couldn't help but be surprised. It was a sign of a good person. Sitting at the dining room table across from the Count, the nanny, and the girl, Count Santorini laughed heartily. Mala was frightened and huddled close to Daisy, trying to hide in her arms, because she was very afraid of the Count. Holding the child close to her, the girl listened in amazement to the Count, who talked about the hairstyles of new recruits, but she did not think that Peta would be so afraid of the old man. The Count's plan to talk fell through until he said with a smile that none of those new recruits had a hairstyle like little Peta's. The Duke glanced at his daughter, looking serious, and told her to stop acting like that and sit straight. Turning her head to the guest, the little girl looked at the Count with huge eyes, asking him if he was a lamb, because his beard reminded of these animals. After this question, Count Santorini laughed heartily, until he turned red with mirth. To everyone's surprise, the old man began to say that he loves sheep, so he grows them on his face and wears them as a beard, and that the little one was the first to learn his secret. The Count allowed the girl to touch the sheep, holding out her hands and laughingly saying that they like to make new friends. Touching his beard, she was satisfied when she heard the Count's stomach growl. So that the lambs would not starve, she put broccoli in the old man's beard. The Duke and Daisy rose from their seats, calling out to the child in unison. They were both surprised at what she had done. But the Count only laughed when he got the broccoli. He said that everything was fine with him and that Milady just wanted to feed the lambs. The nanny told Peta that you can't do that, and the Duke apologized to the guest, putting his hand to his forehead. After dinner, the Count, holding a glass of wine in his hand, thanked the Duke because he did not have a family to spend such sweet and family evenings in the circle of relatives. Crouching next to the couch where Peta was sleeping, Santorini said that he would be glad to have a grandchild like this little one.
The Duke, sitting calmly and confidently and clasping his hands in the castle, said that the Count had relatives, a daughter and a grandson.
The old man turned, looking puzzled at the Duke, who continued the story and could not believe his ears. He was listening in confusion to the story of the Duke, who was telling the story of Santorini's life and service in the Alps. When he met the girl, the guild leader screamed, banging her fists on the bars to bring her son. But then the Duke of Hanson appeared, who calmly and silently opened the door of her cell without answering anything. Squinting at the girl, he apologized for separating her from his son, but said he didn't need a reason to detain members of an illegal gang. She shouted, asking what he wanted from them, while the Duke got a chair. The girl did not believe that if it was only a matter of the guild, he would touch her son. After a few seconds, she looked at the Duke's back in confusion, not believing what he said, because he was sure that she and her son would influence the fate of his daughter in the future. At the threshold of her cell now appeared the son, who was glad to see his mother, holding the hand of the old Count of Santorini, who was smiling. The girl, falling to her knees, tightly hugged her son, pressing him to her. She turned warily at the Earl's voice, asking who he was and how he knew her name when he asked if her name was really Andy Nareda. He, blushing a little, now asked if her mother's name was really Celine Nareda, and looking at his daughter. The old man showed a gold locket with a photo of a beautiful young woman. Andy rolled her eyes, not understanding what was going on here and directly asking about it, as well as why he had a photo of her late mother. The Count, falling on the floor, sobbed, saying that he did not know about the existence of his daughter, while she mocked, saying that she did not know that he was of blue blood, although her mother mentioned him before her death. The girl was furious. She shouted for the old man to shut up and not dare to talk about his mother, thinking that he appeared now to get rid of unwanted relatives. The Earl sobbed, bent over on the floor, while the girl screamed that she didn't want to know him, and Daisy looked at Andy in surprise. The author touched the Count's back to support him. Daisy began to defend the Earl, saying that he temporarily moved to another place because he was a mercenary, and at the same time her mother moved to another place, and it was not his fault that he abandoned them. But after the Duke's question about whether her mother had spoken badly about Santorini, the girl cooled down, although she said that it was too late now and asked why he had appeared now. The author asked not to say such things because Andy might not see how her son will grow up if she continues to live the way she lives. She went on to say that hating her father is not the most important thing in life, and that she can ruin her own son's life. The Duke wanted to support the girl, so, glancing at her, he said that her mother definitely wished her only happiness, like his own. Andy was silently looking at one point, and her face reflected the sorrow for her mother, which she now remembered in the last moments of her life. Raising his head, the Count openly sobbed, asking her for forgiveness. The girl watched her father fight and blame only himself for everything that happened. She was almost crying from all the emotions she was feeling. Turning away, Andy put a hand over her mouth, stifling a sob. Her whole body trembled from crying. Daisy, too, wept at the scene, and was surprised to see the Duke approach her with one arm around her and the other taking her hand and squeezing it. Without saying anything, Hanson reached out, running his thumb over her face to wipe away the tears that had frozen in her eyes. He hugged the girl and comforted her while she buried her face in his chest, crying and shaking with sobs. The next day, Daisy sat with the papers across from the Duke, who was drinking tea, and looked surprised when he said she was holding a knighthood application. Hanson talked about what he thinks about changing guild leaders if he becomes a knight and asked the author what she thought about it. Looking at the Duke, she understood that the truce was still far away, but it was a step towards it. And the Duke did it for the sake of a secondary character, which also pleasantly surprised her. The Duke stood up from his seat, putting his hands in his pockets and saying that the Academy can break a boy, because everyone there is only from noble families, and entering the knighthood is completely different. Looking at the papers he had taken from Daisy, Hanson said that knights are taught discipline and order, so this would only benefit the boy. The Duke thought about it after asking if Andy would return to the guild, and remembered that the Earl was watching over her and guiding her on the right path. Leaning on the table and folding his hands on his chest, the Duke was pleased with himself, because he said that he would not join their family, but he would be informed about the state of affairs in Santorini. Daisy was surprised to call him by his title, but he corrected her by saying his name, which surprised her even more. He looked her in the eyes when he said that she could call him by his name, Dion. Leaning down, the Duke said that it would not go like that, when the author began to ask how she could call him that, because in the bar she had never called him and he did not like it. Clearing his throat, he said that he needed to train to avoid such situations in the future. Daisy looked at the Duke and wondered how social status mattered, and whether a commoner like her could call the Duke by his first name. Still blushing and stuttering, Daisy agreed. The Duke came closer, touching her cheek with his fingers, gently and carefully, making the girl stare at him. He said Daisy had been doing very well so far, and he hoped it would continue. Bewitched, the girl turned to the Duke for the title, but immediately corrected herself, calling him by name. He smiled in satisfaction when she corrected herself, saying that he liked what she called him now. After a few seconds, she was holding the bag that Dion had given her, who had wanted to give it to her for a long time, but had no chance and was wondering what it was. Opening it, she saw a pile of gold coins and heard the Duke's voice saying that she had been working for him for a month, and this was her salary. He was surprised why the girl asked about the silver, because he had told her earlier that he would make an allowance if she did well. The girl was pleasantly surprised by what Dion did, smiling at him and still not believing her eyes. And while the author was happy about her salary, the Duke turned away in embarrassment, clearing his throat again. Alone with himself, all Hanson could think about was Daisy's mouth. He did not understand what was happening to him, because this had never happened before, and he remembered how beautiful she was when she just smiled. His thoughts were interrupted by Hardy, who was asked by the Duke if things had been difficult for him the past few days. After thinking about it, the butler said that the Duke turned down many cases because he said he would do something else. Trying not to think about Hardy's words, he decided to change the subject and asked where his daughter was now. After learning that Peta is drawing a gift in honor of Daisy's 30 days of work as a nanny, the Duke is surprised. Has it really been that long? While walking around the city, Daisy kept thinking about the fact that Kashtanchik refused to walk around the city, referring to her own busyness. Nevertheless, while walking, the girl thought that it would also be good to walk alone. Walking among the people, the author thought that today was the perfect day to spend her first salary. The girl from the store where they had been before Pieta's birthday greeted Daisy cheerfully, saying that she was glad to have her back. After hearing that the client was choosing a gift for a child and adult men, the girl with a smile pointed out where to go so that they could choose something suitable together. In front of the author was a beautiful hair hoop with pumpkins, which Peta loved so much. Rejoicing, the girl said that this hoop was the only copy, but she put it away just in case. After choosing a present for Kashtanchik, Daisy couldn't wait for other gift options offered by the girl consultant. With her arms folded across her chest and a few packages by her side, she was serious, because the time had come to make the most difficult choice. The consultant showed a pen encrusted with diamonds from the continent of Del Sur, which would make an ideal gift for the Duke. The nanny was mesmerized by the beauty of the pen until she opened her mouth. She thought that the color of the stone reminded her of the color of Dion's eyes, and she decided to buy it because the gift was worth it. When she left the store, Daisy was holding a bunch of packages in her hands, thinking that she had bought too much. The last point was the Shanu restaurant, where she went to greet her aunt. Here you could buy a lot of sweets for the little ones. That aunt, with a gleam in her eyes, resting her head on her clasped hands, asked if Daisy wanted to tell her something. The author was speechless, looking at the old woman, when she said that gossip was going around, as if a girl had appeared who could make the Duke fall in love with her. After pouring 2 glasses of wine, the aunt started her story again, first asking if the girl had heard about the arrest of the illegal organization a few days ago. The old woman folded her hands, her eyes sparkled, saying that the Duke had gone to save his beloved, who had been kidnapped by the guild. Daisy was speechless when she heard this. She couldn't believe that such gossip had spread. While the girl was blushing, the old woman said that people could feel her incredible beauty even through the cape that was on her and hid her face. The girl wiped her mouth, choked on the wine, and said that everything was fine, although she thought about how distorted the rumors were. Closing her eyes, she remembered the day when the guild was arrested, because she was with the Duke then. The old woman asked if she really did not know anything, and when Daisy answered that she did not, the aunt turned to the voice of one of the guests of the restaurant. The young man said that there were new rumors, not even paying attention to his wife, who asked him to be silent. With the air of a man who knew a secret, the man said that he had heard it from his cousin's brother, and that the Duke's lover was a princess from another country. Unable to endure these lies, Daisy quickly stood up from her seat, saying that time was flying by and she needed to go. After saying goodbye very quickly, she returned to the threshold and waved her hand, promising to visit again later. At the same time, in the palace, Hardy was holding letters in his hands, telling the Duke that he needed to check on something. But he saw the little girl drawing a picture, saying that she also wanted to go with Daisy, and complaining that she had too much to do. Leaning over the girl, Hardy praised her with a smile, saying that the drawing was getting better and better. Dvoretsky spoke with a smile about the pains of creativity, while Peta sighed that drawing is a delicate thing, and nothing comes out that easily. The boy looked surprised at the girl who said that Daisy needed to rest at least sometimes. He didn't think Milady could say something like that, but the little girl, turning to the drawing, told Hardy to go because she had to concentrate on her work. After some time, Peta happily looked at the drawing, which she had finally finished. She could not admire what came out. The girl ran up to her father, drawing his attention and telling him to look at what she had drawn. Kashtanchik showed pictures. The first showed her with pumpkins. The second showed a sheep eating broccoli. The third picture showed Dad and Daisy standing next to each other. Hanson praised his daughter with a smile, saying that she got better with each new drawing. While praising Peta, the Duke thought about how much his daughter liked Daisy and thought about his own gift. The little girl jumped joyfully from her father's arms, greeting the nanny, who finally returned to the palace. The girl picked Peta up in her arms, happy and laughing at the number of her questions about what she was doing and if she was having fun. The Duke called the girl, asking her if she would go with him to the island tomorrow, which surprised her. The girl, putting her hand to her chin, thought about what she should do and how to be. Opening the door to her room, Peta appeared on the threshold, who immediately asked what her nanny was doing. Mala looked confused at Daisy, who said with a smile that she was packing. The girl saw her album with a pumpkin, showed it to the babysitter, and said that it was her thing. That girl said with a smile that she approached the meeting very responsibly, so as not to forget anything, because she had not traveled for a long time. The author jumped up from the floor when the girl sadly said, turning her back to her, that she was not going anywhere, so there was no need to worry about her. Clutching her thing, the little girl almost cried, saying that she would go with Daisy next time, and that she and her father should go together. Saying that there was no point in her going if Milady wasn't going, she angered the little one, who screamed in disbelief. Peta was surprised to hear that adults simply cannot go anywhere together. Hearing that the nanny still wanted to go to the island, the little girl happily said that she agreed to go there. Embracing the girl, Daisy rejoiced with her, for they were going together and going to have fun there. Turning her head to the bed, the author thought that the last thing she needed to take care of were the gifts she had bought for her first month on the job. Standing by the side, Peta pointed in amazement at the birds that flew above their ship, so that Daisy would look at them as well. The nanny carefully took the girl in her arms, saying that it was a seagull and that it was very dangerous to hang on the bulwark. Mala was still looking at the seagulls with big eyes, asking what exactly they were eating. Peta cheered up the nanny, saying that she wanted to give them fish, because they serve it every day at home. Putting the baby on the deck, Daisy immediately ran to Hardy, who was hanging over the side and throwing up. Observing how the butler was unwell, the Duke calmly said that he had offered him to stay at home for this very reason, but he had refused. Raising her hand in support, the little girl encouraged Hardy to hang on. Daisy thought to herself with a smile that it was very strange that these two were so friendly. As soon as they docked, Peta came down to Hardy, saying that she would go with him, while Daisy fished for a gaw, thinking that they had arrived very quickly. The servants bowed as one, welcoming the Duke to the island. Daisy was surprised that the servants were also on the island, and the Duke, who was standing nearby, said that this was why they could come there at any time. Following the Duke, the girl wondered how big the Duke's possessions really were. She stopped in surprise, looking at the boy who gave her his hand with a smile, saying that he was going to let them go far and asked for her hand to accompany him. The Duke watched jealously as one of his servants gave Daisy his hand, looking back. He took her hand first, saying in a serious tone that the girl should look at her feet. The servant watched with emotion as the Duke took the girl's hand, putting his own hand to his mouth in a fit of emotion. Holding the Duke's hand, Daisy walked with him with a smile. When they approached the palace on the island, they and Peta were offered freshly squeezed juice. Looking at the woman with the tray and in beautiful clothes, the girl thought that she must be in traditional local dress, which was very beautiful. They settled down on sofas. The Duke was sitting calmly, cross-legged. Peta was running around the house, and Daisy was drinking juice. The girl pulled the surprised nanny by the hand, telling her to go with her, because she wanted to play by the sea. After changing, they went to the beach. Mala ran in amazement towards the sea, while the author opened her mouth in astonishment at the beautiful scenery, not even noticing Hardy and the Duke walking behind. Pierretta, sitting on the shore in the tide, joyfully called the nanny to come to her. Smiling and now thinking that Peta on the island is not chestnut, but tomato, Daisy went to the girl, who was now calling her father as well. The Duke was sitting on a deck chair and supporting his head with his hand, watched his daughter and her nanny, who were a little further away. Looking around, the author said that Dad had decided to rest, and thought to herself that today the Duke looked completely different than usual. Only when she turned to the child who called her, Daisy received a starfish in the face, and then with a laugh, the girl covered herself from the water that Peta splashed on her. The Duke appeared next to the nanny, putting his hand on her shoulder and surprising her with his appearance. He asked his daughter to stop gluing the fool. Heidi walked over to Milady and whispered something in her ear, coming up with a plan that would work. Daisy and Dion looked on in confusion as they tried to understand what Chestnut and the butler were talking about. Seeing that Hardy took a palm leaf, the author stood up for the Duke, who warned the butler not to do what he intended. Hardy and Peta laughed heartily. The little girl was delighted that the butler had splashed her father with water. The Duke stood there in silence, soaking wet, as Daisy asked if he was all right. But the Duke did not wait for another towel. He simply took off his shirt, because it was wet, to dry himself with what the girl had given him. Daisy bowed her head, shocked to see Dion shirtless, thinking to herself that she had no idea how handsome he was. Peta watched with satisfaction as her nanny struggled and her father struggled to get the towel she was holding. Daisy handed the Duke a clean towel to dry himself off. Hardy was just frolicking with his lady in the water, leading his dances, when the Duke called to him. The next second, he was not joking. The Duke informed him that he would cut his salary for this month. He couldn't believe it as he questioned. And then, under the surprised look of Daisy, who was holding a towel to her chest, the Duke announced that he was going to his place and, turning around, went into the room. While her daughter was praising Hardy and asking what a pay cut was, the author looked around, wondering what was happening to the Duke. The Duke was moving away from the fun, but if you looked closely, you could see that his ears were red from embarrassment. Nanny and Chestnut were holding their bellies, closing their eyes, and saying that they were both full. They all returned to the setting sun, which little by little touched the line of the sea on the horizon. Everyone looked in amazement at the incredible landscape. The girl tried to remember the last time she sat in such an atmosphere and watched the sunset. Thinking that now is the perfect time for gifts, Daisy gave the first piety a box in her favorite color, surprising the child. Mala began to cheer loudly, and Daisy looked back at the Duke and the butler, who were looking at all this in surprise, frowning. She wanted to give the gift as quietly as possible. Now Heidi opened his gift and was surprised, who did not expect to receive anything from Daisy. He was echoed by the child, who was eagerly tearing the packaging. Mala happily put on a hoop with pumpkins, asking the nanny how she looked with the new thing. Hardy thanked him for the gift, while Peta climbed into the girl's arms, hugging her in thanks. She looked around to see the Duke, in his calm manner, drinking tea and watching everything that was happening before him. That girl realized, rolling her eyes, that she did not have enough courage to get a gift for the Duke, and she tried to convince herself that it should be given as casually as others. And while the nanny found the strength to give the most important gift, Peta shouted to Hardy that the sun had already set, attracting his attention. Taking the girl by the hand, both of them under questioning looks and questions where they were going, Hardy left the terrace. Daisy was confused when the little one said that now it was not hot outside and they were going for a walk, and asked her not to follow them. She also stopped her father, who also wanted to go with them, saying that he could not either. The Duke was equally surprised by this reaction, and under looks full of incomprehension, the How to Marry a Duke duo quickly left. Getting up from her place, the girl was in a panic. Night would soon come, and it was dangerous for her because she remembered their card game. Clasping his hands in front of him, the Duke looked at the girl, waiting for his gift, as she read in his gaze. Daisy blushed as she thought about the fact that now the gift would have a double meaning and that it had to be given while they were all together. Dion cleared his throat as the girl began to speak, causing her to shut up awkwardly and stare at him. The moment was wasted, and turning away, Daisy was thinking about whether to give the gift at all, until the Duke looked somewhere to the side and called to her. Hanson took the author's hand, gently and carefully, as he always did everything related to her. Holding hands, they looked with a sinking heart at the sunset, which decorated the sky in crimson shades. Daisy folded her arms in a lock on her chest, not believing her eyes. The Duke was showing her thousands of fireflies circling above them. The Duke, squinting at the girl, smiled, telling her that he was glad that she liked it. Returning to him, she thought that this day was the best gift, and she will always remember these moments. The surprised Duke looked at a blushing Daisy, who thanked him for taking them with him and handed him a small gift box. She began to make excuses, saying that the gift was small and maybe he already had one, but she wanted to thank him. The Duke was smiling, admitting that he thought there would be no gift for him. All this time he was looking at the box in his hands. Hanson stared at the quill, examining it and noticing a stone that Daisy said reminded her of his eyes. After a short pause, the Duke smiled broadly, still holding the gift and assuring him that he would treasure the gift very much. The girl was very happy when she heard these words, because she was worried that the Duke would not like the gift. When she met the Duke's eyes, she turned back to the sea almost immediately, saying that she would choose something better next time while he was still looking at her. Still a bit red, she thought about how beautiful it was around her, framing her hands and letting go of the fact that she suddenly felt hot. The Duke, who agreed that it was beautiful here, made the girl turn to him. He blushed, embarrassed, but he was looking directly at Daisy. And then, he turned to face the ocean. Now the two of them were looking there together, and Daisy kept asking herself if he had said that. As she looked ahead and thought of the silence that surrounded her, Daisy felt a tickle on her face, now waving her arms and trying to shake off the insects that were flying in different directions. The Duke, while the girl was nervous about the fireflies, tried to explain that she felt so much because the sea was nearby, and looked at her with incomprehension. Driving the fireflies away from the girl, the Duke led her in the direction of the house. The next morning, the author was going through her things to check whether she had packed everything when a joyful Peta flew to her. She watched in horror as Mala and Hardy were all red, yet happy. The girl watched them both scratching, talking about how there were too many mosquitoes in the room. After telling them to wait, the nanny began to look for a remedy that was supposed to help them, but she did not notice a firefly that was in one of her things. When they returned to the palace, Peta was standing in front of the door of her room with a gift in her hair, asking her to come in as soon as possible. Daisy looked questioningly at the door, realizing that she had no idea that another gift was waiting for her. Taking the nanny's hand, the girl pulled her behind her, while she watched the sweet face of Milady with emotion. She happily showed her several sheets of paper, saying that she would now explain everything that was drawn on them. Nanny looked at the first picture in amazement, not believing that she had drawn it for her. It was the scene when they first met, and she gave the girl a pumpkin candy. Then the little one showed another picture, saying that it was Peta herself with a pumpkin. That girl stopped being happy when she heard a familiar voice. The Duke, folding his hands on his chest and leaning on the doorframe, said that his daughter had not drawn so much before. Mala showed more and more pictures that she drew. There were many scenes that made both Peta and her nanny happy. The author scooped the girl up in her arms when she saw the last drawing, the one that showed her, the Duke, the little one, and the butler inside the big heart. She sincerely thanked the child for her gift. Daisy was touched. Tears welled up in her eyes as she assured the little one that she really liked the gift. Hardy and Henston watched the scene unfold before their eyes with smiles. Having hung the pictures in frames on her wall, Daisy made a habit of looking at them, remembering the wonderful moments that the child had drawn. She was interrupted by a girl who extended her hand to her, running into her room, and asked if she wanted to read a book together. And while Peta walked confidently, the author thought about why she was so excited, because it was just reading a book. And when they entered the library, the Duke looked questioningly at the girl, who was equally surprised that Henston was in the room. Mala immediately turned and ran somewhere until Daisy couldn't take her eyes off her father, wondering what he was doing here. He said that Peta had dragged him out of the office, and now they were both looking at the girl who took the book and lay on the floor on her stomach, opening the book. The nanny thought about whether the child really wanted to read, because she changed one book after another and concluded that the child was simply unbearable. When there was a knock, the little girl jumped up, saying that she must be Hardy, to the complete astonishment of her nanny. Both were puzzled by Hardy's behavior, not understanding what was happening to him, because he was very cute, holding the quality of the letter in his hand. As he read the letter from the imperial palace, the Duke put his head in his fist, telling himself that this day had come too quickly. Peta asked if they would go to the dance, because she really wanted to. The Duke was clearly not one of those who would like to be there, and Daisy, surprised, asked what kind of dances they were talking about. The girl wondered in confusion what the Duke was talking about when he lamented that he would be tormented again with talk of marriage. Hardy joked to the Duke's bewilderment that he was sorry, as the Duke already had a pair this year, as he wouldn't mind wearing a dress. The girl could not stand it, turning to the butler and asking what was happening and whether there would be some event in the palace. Daisy listened to the story about the royal family, which held a ball every year and that she was sure to attend, putting 2 and 2 together in her head. She questioned whether they really meant that the entire royal family, along with one of the infant princes, would be attending this ball. Returning to the girl, the Duke looked at her in comprehension, saying that the prince she was talking about was still young. She would still know the royal family, thinking only that the ball was an opportunity to meet another main male character, Edward Chester, who was Chestnut's age. She recalled how excited she was to create this particular character on her own. In the future, the boy will become a tyrant who breaks up families, putting on a mask of friendliness, and the only thing he will care about is his long, rust-colored hair. Daisy thought he was her taste, but now he is as small and cute as Chestnut. And in the next second, Hardy surprised her, saying that this is the only event at which members of the Magic Tower appear. The Duke turned to the girl, saying that they needed to talk and distracting her from her own thoughts. Looking at her husband, the author understood. He also remembers, because she told about everything on the day they met. While walking in the garden, Daisy listened as Dion said that he remembered her story, where the head of the tower and the second prince played an important role in Peta's life. The girl assured the Duke that she really created him herself, which is why she remembers him in the smallest details. She did not believe that her character would be at the ball, remembering that he would become emperor, because his brother would not be interested in the throne, and this is how he would appear in Peta's life.
The author, looking at the Duke, asked him what the words about marriage, which Hardy had previously said, meant.
Turning his side to the girl and looking somewhere in the garden, the Duke said that he was still alone, and the clock was still ticking. Without saying anything, she did not know why she asked, so she said with a smile that they should return to Peta, because she is the most important now. The Duke was confused and sharply turned to the girl when she said that Peta and the second prince could become relatives in the future. And then he turned his back on her and walked away, telling her to forget what he asked. Daisy was completely confused by Dion's behavior. In no way, the Duke talked about the ball, and the girl, looking at him, thought about who exactly was the most welcome guest. Looking at the Duke, she understood that he rarely appears in public, so this ball will be the only opportunity to see the Duke, and the first beauties from all over the country will gather. Realizing that she exhaled noisily and felt restless, the girl covered her mouth with her hand and thought that it was necessary to urgently change the topic of conversation so that the Duke would not notice her mood. She tried to explain that she wanted to look at Prince Edward, laughing, although before that, she surprised the Duke with the question that he would not go to the ball with the servants. Her words were obvious, although Daisy didn't understand why she was behaving like that today, so, embarrassed, she asked the Duke to forget what she said. And the very next moment, surprising Dion, She turned and walked away, announcing that she had to go to her business. In the evening, Hardy stood in the Duke's office and was surprised that he had decided to write a reply to the invitation so soon, while Hanson had begun to write. He frowned as he wrote, thinking that he would have been inundated with invitations if he had dragged his reply and not sent it so quickly. The Duke raised his head from the paper, seeing that the butler was looking at what he was writing, so he asked him to leave the office. Standing behind the door, embarrassed, the butler thought that the Duke was colder than usual. But his thoughts were interrupted by Milady. She was running, asking the boy how everything went. The girl, clenching her fists, asked if Papa was going to the ball, and Hardy, clearing his throat, said that most likely the Duke had indeed decided to go. Peta was delighted, and her eyes were shining. She shouted, saying that Papa would definitely go to the ball with Daisy. After Hardy asked her to speak more quietly, the girl apologized and began speaking in a whisper, causing the boy to laugh softly and stroke her hair. The butler recalled that the Duke was too careful when answering the letter, and he did not even think that Hanson was so carefully hiding his feelings. Mala brought the boy back to reality, supporting him and telling him not to worry, because he has her. And suddenly he understood. She is right. He has nothing to worry about. The next morning, Daisy and Peta sat at the table, wondering that the Duke had gone to Utena and would not return until tomorrow. While the babysitter was eating, scowling at Hardy, Chestnut shamed the boy, reminding him that he should have woken her up and hadn't. The girl folded her hands in offense, saying that Hardy always laughed at her when he said that the Duke had come in, and even kissed her before leaving. Daisy looked at the girl in surprise when she asked if she was bored with her. With childish directness, Peta said, raising her finger, that Nanny misses her dad when he's gone. All the servants turned on the girl and her nanny, not believing their ears and frozen in place. Leaning over, the author asked the child why she should be sad when the Duke is not around. Hardy decided to save the situation and, announcing that there were too many breadcrumbs on the lady's clothes, took her in his arms and carried her away from the dining room. She understood that the Duke's absence was a chance for these two gray cardinals, and she was determined to expose them both. Now she watched as Hardy, looking around several times, knocked on the door of Peta's room, informing her that it was he who could open it. Hearing their conversation, where they said that they had little time for anything, the girl smiled. She knew that they were up to something. Daisy swung open the door, shouting that they were caught in the heat. But she saw that Hardy was standing on the steps, taking out a painting box, and he and Peta were looking questioningly at the nanny. Jumping to the girl, Kashtanchik said that Rodison, whom she missed very much, would come today. That's why she sent a letter with an invitation. Mala began to urge Hardy to give her the paper as soon as possible, because she wanted to draw a picture and give it to her friend, having finished it before she arrived. She started apologizing to the boy because it was her job, and she was so busy spying that she didn't do her duties at all today. But they both smiled, saying that everything was fine. Hardy was happy to help the girl. They asked Daisy if she wanted to draw with them, and they looked like little devils. Kashtanchik waved her hands, forcing the nanny to go paint faster because there was little time. But then Rodison appeared, running joyfully to her friend, announcing that she had arrived. In order to be faster, the little one went down the railing, which caused Daisy to scream because she was afraid that the little one would be crippled. The girls hugged each other, greeting each other, and being happy that they had met. Looking at the children from the second floor, Daisy could not believe her eyes. Did they really like each other so much? Deciding that the investigation was closed, the nanny ran down the stairs to be with the girls. The author admired, putting her hands to her face and smiling, a drawing of Peta, who drew herself and Rodison, who was sitting next to her. As soon as Daisy left for the goodies, Rodison asked Chestnut if this was really the woman who would soon be her mother, putting her hand to her mouth. Closing her eyes, the little girl breathed out, saying that it was really her, but she did not yet know when it would happen. Rodison said that she liked Daisy, and, to Peta's surprise, added that she wished her mother had been so kind. And then she put her hand on her friend's shoulder, supporting her in such a simple but sweet gesture. And after a few seconds, they hugged each other, and Roti assured her that she was happy for Peta because they were friends. Gathering courage, Kashtanchik asked her friend if she wanted to touch her head. Mala, with a serious look, resting her hands on her sides, said that it was something like a ritual, and it was very important. The girl touched Peta's hair in surprise, saying that it was very soft. The next day, Kashtanchik flew into her father's office, opening the door wide and drawing attention to herself. She immediately found herself in the arms of her father, who, like the girl, was happy to see her daughter, hugging her. And while Peta was telling her father about the guest that they had, Daisy entered the study in a fit of rage, leaning her hand on the door and saying that Peta shouldn't be running around the palace like that. The girl stopped dead when she saw who had returned home. The Duke immediately gave her all his attention, holding his daughter in his arms, whose eyes were shining with her plan, which was now being carried out. Having come closer to the table, the author saw the pen that she had given the Duke, and, judging by everything, he used it very actively. He smiled faintly and praised the nanny, because she did very well, even with the guest that his daughter called. They were interrupted by Hardy, who cleared his throat and drew attention to himself. He held out an envelope, saying that a reply had come from the Imperial Palace. Daisy squinted at the envelope in surprise, concluding that it was about the ball, because what else could come from it? The Duke sat down next to his daughter, who wanted to read the letter, smiling and touching her hair. Mala began to read, stopping at words whose meaning she did not know. She poked the letter at her father to look at the word, while Hardy suggested that this was the person who would be keeping company at the ball. They both looked happily at the Duke and Daisy, because they had already concluded who exactly would accompany him to the ball. Daisy looked at the two in surprise, not knowing if they were really talking about her. So that no one would interfere, the Duke asked his daughter and the butler to leave, closing the door behind them. And then, sitting in his favorite position, he said that she would go to the ball with him. He did not ask, but asserted, and his tone did not accept objections. The girl put her hand to her chest, surprised. She was an ordinary person without status, and did not understand how she could be at the ball. Holding up the papers, the Duke said he'd taken care of everything and informed her with his trademark face that didn't show anything that Daisy was now a member of Heidi's family, and she wouldn't have any problems. Looking at the author, Hanson said he hadn't told her about it before because he didn't want to bother her with such trivial matters. Daisy looked at Dion in surprise, thinking that he really meant it, and only nodded when he said that there would be a lot less restrictions on her now. And then she watched as the Duke came closer, saying that he was going to tell her something else after she thought the lack of a title was the problem. Blushing, he admitted that from the very beginning he wanted to go to the ball only with her, looking into her eyes and not hiding his own emotions.
The Duke held out his hand to Daisy, asking her again if she would do him the honor of going to the ball with him.
Daisy placed her hand in the Duke's, gesturing assent to his proposal. Dion smiled in satisfaction, saying that now no one would have any questions for the two of them. When it was time for the ball, the little girl ran out into the hall, asking if the nanny had forgotten anything, if she had put on her earrings and gloves. To Hardy's laughter, she folded her arms over her chest and assured that she wouldn't cause any trouble until Daisy and Daddy were gone, because she was already 7 years old. The girl and the Duke said goodbye to Peta, leaving her in the care of Hardy, who promised to look after my lady. While they were riding in the carriage, the author kept thinking that she could not believe that she would actually be at the ball. Moreover, one should not miss the opportunity to get to know a secondary character. She asked the Duke a little uncertainly if he had not met the second prince before, because he had been to such events a lot. He said that he met him a couple of times, but more often than not, because he was still a child. Daisy mentioned her character always having his hair neatly done and having emerald brown eyes that matched his hair color. She couldn't believe it was happening. The Duke was looking poker-faced at her as he listened to her tirade, then said that description was very similar to Prince Glenn, Edward's older brother. The author put her hands to her mouth, asking how she should be, because she thought that she would have to wait 15 years for her type of men to grow up. She even raised her fists, excited to meet someone so similar to the character she had created. The Duke mirthlessly supported his head with his hand, looking at the author, and only snickered.
They arrived now, standing in the hall, where all the servants bowed and welcomed the Duke of Hanson on his arrival.
Placing his hand on the girl's arm, which surprised her, Dion reassured her, telling her there was nothing to worry about. But they were interrupted by several girls who surprised Daisy, forcing her to open her mouth. They greeted the Duke, running to him. Even men from aristocratic families rejoiced at his arrival, because the Duke was to become the decoration of the ball. The girls looked at the girl who was next to Hanson and understood that they were seeing her for the first time at a social event. Bowing, Daisy bowed in greeting as they discussed that she was a daughter of Heidi's family. Everyone looked at her, whispering to each other who Heidi's family was, because they had no idea about them. While she hesitated, the Duke calmly told her that her family had been in contact with his clan for a long time, and that they themselves were from the rich area of the city of Utena. She turned her head to him in surprise, because she remembered that he had recently gone there on business. He smiled at the girl, and she remembered his words, where he asked her not to worry about anything. Finally, it was time to dance. Everyone around was already dancing, and the Duke and the author just stepped into the middle of the hall. Extending his hand to Daisy with a smile, Dion asked if she would dance with him. The girl, having accepted the invitation, asked not to mind if she stepped on his feet, to which the Duke only shrugged and then smiled, saying that it turned out that this was her first dance. While dancing, the girl felt awkward, scolding herself for worrying too much. Distracted by his breathing against her forehead and his hands on her back, Daisy joked that this was indeed her first dance. They danced without noticing anyone but each other, while everyone in the audience looked at them, talking about how they finally got to see the Duke of Hanson dance. A little later, the girl went outside and sitting on a bench, relaxed. Finally, she had such an opportunity. She regretted leaving Dion alone, remembering how the other girls had turned on him, but she thought he'd be fine because he was used to such activities. Daisy heard crying and looked around to see a boy hiding behind a tree sobbing. She came a little closer, addressing the boy and asking if he came here with his mother and if he was lost. But the boy jumped to his feet, turned to face her, and shouted at her in tears, asking what kind of insolence. He began to say that, in general, he was just resting here when he was disturbed. The girl realized who was in front of her after seeing his hair and eyes, however, while she was admiring the boy, angrily clenched his hands into fists because he was being called. Daisy thought about what the boy had said, asking him to keep it a secret that he was here, then went to see someone she called Henny, who said he was disturbing the servants again. She turned to see a handsome young man who was almost a copy of his little relative and was looking at the girl with a smile. Trying to stay calm, Daisy was squealing with joy inside as she still couldn't believe that she had met two minor characters she had made up herself. Holding his brother in his arms, the first prince asked her who she was. After she bowed and introduced herself, the prince smiled, saying that he really wanted to meet her. The prince said with a sweet smile that his name was too long, so it would be better if she called him Glenn. At the same time, the boy glared at the girl in front of him. The boy said that there would be a second part of the dance soon, and asked if the girl would dance with the Duke of Hanson again. And while Daisy wondered, the prince went on talking, saying that he was surprised that the Duke came with an escort and even danced, and regretted that he had missed it all. The prince said he had invited a painter to paint them because it was a historic moment, and asked with a smile if she would dance with the Duke again. The girl looked at the prince in confusion, not believing what she heard, because the paintings have been preserved for centuries. After bowing, the author apologized and said that it was impossible, thinking to herself that she would not want to create problems for Dion. After her words about the order, the prince began to laugh loudly and boisterously, because his request was only a request. The girl did not answer the question whether he could call her simply Daisy, but only apologized and said that she must return to the Duke because she had left him alone for a long time. Smiling slyly, Prince Glenn said he would like to ask her one last question about the Duke of Hanson, but the Duke himself said that he should ask him personally, looking at the prince without a shadow of a smile. The prince began to laugh, still holding his brother in his arms, and saying that it had been so long since they had seen each other that he had begun to forget what Dion looked like. After nodding briefly and following the rules, he greeted the two princes in front of him. Under the watchful eyes of the royal sons, the Duke returned to Daisy, saying that he had gone to look for her because he was worried, and she apologized for making him worry. They wanted to leave, but the elder prince did not allow it, saying that he still wanted to ask something, and after the answer, they could be free. Dion and Daisy weren't too happy. He turned serious, saying that he had heard that the Duke was mobilizing a squad of knights to arrest the guild in Pontypool. Smiling sweetly, Glenn said that he had heard that the Duke had saved a girl of unearthly beauty, and now asked if it was true. And again, they were both confused, for after Hanson's statement, the prince asked if it was not Daisy. Dion calmly replied that, if there was an opportunity, he would definitely tell the prince about everything, because he was now with the lady, and it was impolite to leave her to talk to him. Their conversation was interrupted by the servants, who already had tears in their eyes. They searched for the prince and were very happy to find him. The little one in the arms of his brother, who was smiling, began to kick and said that he should run away when he saw the servants. Walking with his brother and assuring them that it wouldn't be long, Glenn turned his head to the pair and bid them farewell. After the prince winked at her, Daisy blushed and the Duke gave her a sidelong glance. He smiled when the girl corrected herself by calling him by his first name, and joked that she changed her style of speech depending on the environment, and assured him that he liked it when she called him that. They returned home much later than expected, and the girl tried to be quieter, but was surprised to see that Peta was still awake. The Duke, taking his daughter in his arms, asked her with a surprised look if she really hadn't gone to bed yet. After putting Kashtanchik to sleep in her crib, the Duke and the nanny walked down the corridor, and she said that it was time for her to go too. Hanson watched the girl follow her into her room as they bade each other good night. He blushed a little, realizing that this was the first ball in his life when he was worried, because Daisy was next to him today. He remembered how, sitting in the carriage, he saw Daisy's smile and her dreams about the ball. He realized that he cared about her. He put his hand to his face, blushing even more and thinking about everything that happened today. The Duke concluded that he was a complete fool. The next morning, a cheerful and smiling Daisy appeared in Peta's room, waking up the little one. Taking the child, who was still sleeping, Daisy jokingly said that she should have breakfast and she could go to bed later. Kashtanka rubbed her eyes, thinking about her dream, and the girl looked at the empty dining room in surprise. They started the day much later, but hadn't Dion come down yet? Hardy was frantically checking the Duke's schedule because he thought he had a meeting that day just by looking at my lord. The Duke looked incredible, with a beautiful ruffled shirt and a white frock coat with a blue stone in the middle, and cuffs on his arms that he had never worn before. The Duke announced with a tired look that he had nothing to do today, but he didn't look good, to put it mildly. Hardy was now trying to explain why he had said the Duke didn't look his usual self, while he was throwing bolts of lightning at him already seated at the table. Daisy complimented him, saying he looked good on him. Everyone present noticed that the Duke liked her comment. Hanson was sitting at the table with everyone, but his thoughts were far away. He was trying to think of how Daisy had been unobtrusively called on a date. The Duke thought it would be nice to take Daisy where she wanted to be, but swallowed when he realized that he probably wouldn't be able to ask her out. With the air of a connoisseur, he began to tell about the beautiful places of Pontypool, but he chose those that needed an escort. They sat facing each other, embarrassed by the situation. The girl looked surprised at the Duke, who said he would gladly keep her company if she had a place she wanted to go. Before bed, Daisy sat in her room with her head in her hands and thought about what had happened this afternoon. She remembered how the Duke had said that he had nothing to do and was asking her out on a date. Covering her face with her hands, she blushed and wondered if this word had some other meaning. The next day, the girl brought a stack of paper, giving it to the Duke, who did not understand anything. And then, after looking at several points of what was written, he asked in surprise if these were the places where she would like to visit. Realizing that she had been writing it all night, he couldn't help but laugh, much to Daisy's confusion. They were both very happy now. The Duke said they would go everywhere. They came to a coffee shop, which was the only one in the kingdom that had equipment for making coffee under pressure. Daisy was showing it to the Duke, who was very interested. Rejoicing that the taste was excellent, the girl did not even notice that she had left a mustache of foam above her upper lip. Hanson looked at the girl with a smile, saying that she eats the quality of strange things. Taking her cup in one hand, because the girl offered to try it, he bent down a little, running his free hand over her lips and wiping the milky mustache. As he tasted the coffee, the Duke blushed a little, making the excuse that Daisy looked like Peta at that moment, so he automatically reached out and wiped the foam. She took a step but stumbled and found herself in the Duke's arms with a surprised look. They were both embarrassed, but the Duke let the girl go and, turning around, said that everything was fine and that they should go to another place on her list. Dion took the author's hand so that they could leave the cafe together. Even his ears were red, but the Duke kept mumbling that she was still like Peta, no matter how many times he told her to be more careful. Daisy was leaning on the handrails of the bridge, literally hanging on them and admiring the lake that everyone recommended her to see. The question whether she could walk arm in arm with the Duke even flew out of her head. Looking at how many emotions the lake evoked in her, Hanson understood that the girl was not lying. She was really here for the first time. The Duke replied with a smile that he could, watching how Daisy excitedly pointed to the boat and wanted to ride it. Hanson was shaking with exertion, for he had never thought that the dam was not so simple a matter as it seemed. The girl reached out and touched the Duke's forehead, checking to see if he had a temperature. She really wanted to help, So she offered that now she would row herself and he could give her the oars. And when the Duke said that he was himself, the girl understood with a smile who Kashtanchik was so stubborn about. He was sitting resting on the bench and sweating when Daisy called his name. The Duke looked the girl up and down in confusion as she came closer and placed her hands on his shoulders. Hanson blushed when he realized after her words that she was just covering him from the sun so that he wouldn't be so hot. Holding her hand to keep Daisy from walking away, he still looked into her eyes and said he was wondering about something. He asked if she remembered talking about the brown-haired character she made up. The girl, with her hands folded on her chest, thought about the fact that the second prince she had come up with would meet Chestnut when he became emperor, and asked herself if it could be prevented. The Duke sat, noticeably more gloomy than before, because the girl asked him what he was asking about, thinking too much. Blushing, he looked away and covered his mouth with his hands as he asked her if she had any other options for the ideal type of man. That girl thought that he was about the writer's taste, now thinking about what the Duke had asked. Looking at the Duke, she knew that her ideal type in real life was a warm and gentle man like the one sitting in front of her. Daisy blushed quickly as the Duke tried to figure out why. Meanwhile, in the palace, Hardy walked in circles and wondered if the Duke would do something stupid and talk about something boring. Rhodison and Peta were knitting, sitting on the floor, and the little girl asked the butler to stop walking back and forth because he was in the way. As Hardy looked at Milady in confusion, she told Rothheisen that it was too early to talk about her future mother, but it would definitely happen. The girls started hugging when Chestnut told Hardy that Rothheisen was on their side because she and she were best friends. Roti asked why they were so worried because a walk is good. The boy explained that he was worried that everything would go well on the walk. Smiling, Hardy realized that it didn't matter how things turned out because Roti was right, and sometimes it was enough to make people happy just by being around each other. Rhodison, with a twinkle in her eye, asked if her friend would go to a festival where they light lanterns and release them into the sky. Folding her hands on her chest, the little girl said that she had been there 1,000,000 times and was not interested, which surprised the butler very much. Peta flew, holding out her hands and calling her nanny. She was very happy to see her again. Sitting down, the girl immediately took the baby in her arms and asked with a smile whether she had behaved well. Duke, rolling his eyes, told Hardy that they were back. He was very tired, and the bags under his eyes were very visible. Seeing in Henston's eyes that they had a good time, the butler was glad, because now he could convince him to go to the festival. While talking to Hardy, Daisy was inspired by the festival that the boy mentioned, saying that she would like to go there. The Duke cocked his ears, standing a few paces behind. Smiling, he asked if they would go there together if she wanted to go there so much. Rejoicing that she will be at the festival, the author started spinning Peta, who rejoiced with her. Heidi thought that the first ideal option would be the center of the beach, where the entire festival would be visible. The second option was the edge of the beach, where you could also observe the stars, because they are best seen there. Folding his hands on his chest, he could not choose which place would be more suitable and lamented that it was difficult. But then he thought that these two could be put on a couch away from Peta and Hardy himself, and it would be perfect for them in the very middle of the beach. On the day of the festival, the Duke remembered that Peta and Daisy had abandoned him, so now he was asking the assistant where they were. Smiling, he learned about the center and the edge of the beach, deciding that his place was exactly at the edge. So he said that he would find it himself and not wait for Hardy. Hanson smiled with satisfaction, for they had chosen a spot at the deserted end of the beach. It was perfect. Hardy tried to catch his breath, resting on his knees and asking the Duke what he was doing here, but he simply said he was late. The butler tried to explain to the Duke that this was the wrong place, saying that he should be sitting in the center of the beach and by no means here. Descending, they looked at the multitude of people scurrying between the trees, waiting for flashlights. Around the gazebo where the Hardys had recently been in Henston, lanterns began to rise, attracting the attention of everyone around. And while the Duke was watching with everyone, the butler was not feeling very well. It was a complete failure of his plan. Both now saddened, the Duke and the butler sat in the bower and looked in different directions. Strange girls noticed a gazebo and two gentlemen there, whispering about who they were. Propping his head with his hand, the Duke, without looking at his servant, told him not to have any surprises next time. At the same time, Daisy and Peta admired the beautiful view, raising their heads to the sky. The little girl sat on the arms of the surprised nanny, holding in her hands a bouquet of beautiful flowers, which she had given the girl. The nanny hugged Kashtanchik, saying that she was very glad that she went to this event with her. The next day, Hardy brought a letter, interrupting the Duke and Daisy's conversation when he told him about it. But there was also a letter for Daisy. The girl looked at the envelope with the seal, thinking about who could send her the letter. Confused and surprised, the girl even opened her mouth. The letter was sent by the first prince. Hardy stared in surprise at the letter Daisy was reading, wondering only what it said. The girl looked up at the Duke, surprised to say that it was an invitation to a party. Daisy admitted that she really wanted to get to the party, and even more so to ride horses, because such a walk was offered by the prince. And although the Duke said that it was a good offer, his face betrayed his emotions. He was clearly not happy with the prince's attention. Realizing that Dion wasn't thrilled, the girl now tried to tell him that he didn't have to go when he suggested they go.
Hanson said it would be nice to be at the party after a long break. Behind the Duke, Hardy almost lost his jaw in astonishment.
The butler leaned over to the nanny with a smile, asking if she knew how to ride horses, while the Duke listened intently, his head turned towards her. Now he smiled noticeably, looking at the girl and offering to teach her. Daisy watched in amazement as the prince threw a party right on the beach by the sea, while the Duke stayed a few paces behind her. She did not even notice when he hurried off, now giving Daisy a hand to help her off the horse. The first prince called out to Daisy with a smile, drawing attention to himself and thanking her for agreeing to come. As they began to bow, Glenn put a hand on the girl's shoulder with a laugh, winking at her and telling her there was no need for formalities. Standing in front of the girl, the Duke thanked for the invitation, looking a little angry. He was visibly jealous. But the prince did not notice this, only smiling and saying that it was he who should be thanked, because the presence of the Duke ensured a full house at the party. Duke and Daisy sat down at the table next to each other, looking at the vast array of goodies on the table. After a few seconds, their mouths fell open in surprise when the prince sat down in his place at the head of the table, threw his hands behind his head, and sprawled on the chair. The prince said that his younger brother Edward remembered the girl's name because he was angry and sulky, because she called him Little. With a smile, he asked if the girl would like to come and play with the second prince, because he still considered her friendly. Daisy couldn't believe what she was hearing. She did not believe that she would be able to meet Prince Edward again. At the same time, the Duke looked at the girl, waiting for her answer with a sinking heart. The prince went on to talk about how Edward would be glad, because he had been feeling very lonely these past few days. Hanson, with a smile, invited the two princes to his palace in Bonus, which should soon be completed. He said he would make an exception for them, although he never calls strangers. While the Duke looked jealously at Daisy, sipping tea, she thought that he wanted to distance the little prince from Chestnut, because Bonus was quite far away. Glenn was very pleased with the invitation, saying that he would not miss such an opportunity, because he was invited by the Duke of Henston himself. Everyone at the party was about the same age, and they couldn't be happy for Daisy, because she was tutoring the Duke's daughter and complimenting her. Although she agreed, she thought only that the only thing the girl had learned from her was to make origami in the shape of a pumpkin. While Daisy was thinking that she was hungry, and that it was not a good idea to take the treats first, the Duke was watching her intently, and then he carefully began to put several, in his opinion, delicious cakes on a plate with tongs. The girl looked in surprise as he placed the plate in front of her, thinking only that everyone was looking at them. Seeing this scene and how everyone was staring at the Duke and Daisy, the first prince began to laugh, drawing attention to himself and asking why no one touched the cakes that had been prepared especially for them. The girl narrowed her eyes at the prince while he kept his attention on himself, and talked about cakes and the famous lemon pie. She also started eating, first tasting some incredibly delicious cake. Riding a horse and entering the sea, Daisy couldn't help but be happy. It seemed to her that she was swimming on the waves. But the Duke, who came up to her, asked her to stay a little further from the water. But the very next moment, the girl almost fell from the horse when something hit his leg. She was scared. A girl on the same horse that hit Daisy's horse came up to the bewildered Henston, smiled sweetly, and greeted him. Dion, with an indifferent expression on his face, said that the girl shouldn't be too close to him on the horse, so he directly asked her to move away. The prince asked to surprise Daisy if she was all right with a smile as she turned to him at the sound of his voice. He also saw this situation. Still smiling, Glenn said that he had been watching her for a long time and that there was something special about Daisy. The girl's horse reared up, and she clung to the reins to at least somehow hold on to the saddle. The Duke called out to her in fright, looking at what was happening. The girl was sitting in the water, albeit shallow, all wet and scared. And when everyone sympathized with her, the girl approaching the Duke put her hand to her mouth, smiling broadly. But she yelped and flinched a little as Prince Glen, now soaking wet as well, splashed into the water beside her. While straightening his hair, the boy laughed and said that it was really refreshing. The servants shouted, calling the prince and being afraid for him, but he only said that he was fine. The Duke threw a towel over her shoulders, asking if everything was all right with her and if the girl was not injured. She looked at Dion in surprise, saying that his clothes would get wet if he sat that close. Taking Daisy in his arms, the Duke looked at the prince, asking if he was all right. And while the prince was surrounded by servants who cared about his well-being and health, Hanson told the girl that she first needed to change clothes. And again, they attracted too much attention and everyone was staring at the Duke's back, whispering that he was carrying a girl in his arms. The prince was also watching, but he was upset that he wasn't carrying Daisy Heidi in his arms, and that it was the Duke that she had allowed to take her out of the water. As the prince was saying goodbye to the guests, he was called, and when he turned around, he saw Daisy and Dion, who were in different clothes and also about to say goodbye. The prince smiled and thanked them both for coming, saying that he was the one to thank for the day. The author, bowing her head, thanked the prince for saving her today and also apologized for it. He tried to pretend that he didn't understand what the girl was talking about, but Daisy knew. She said that he fell into the water on purpose. Frowning and scratching the back of his head, Prince Glen looked away and said it was just a knight's duty. Having arrived and wanting to see Peta, the Duke and Daisy flew into the room in fright when they heard crying from there. The nanny tried to calm the girl down by touching her cheeks when she said that the pumpkin had fallen off her hoop. The adults breathed a sigh of relief when they heard that everything was fine with the girl. Looking at his daughter, the Duke said that this is why he always reminds her how important it is to take care of the things that are dear to her. Mala began to sob even more because she did not listen to her father, and Daisy turned her head to him, a little angry with the Duke. While stroking Kashtanchik's hair while she was crying, the nanny said that everything was fine and that the pumpkin could be attached back. Now the girl hugged the nanny, saying that she was the best because she would fix the broken hoop, and Daisy, hugging the child, smiled sincerely. She gave the hoop to the master, who pleased her that it was possible and said that it would take him 3-4 days. Leaving the workshop, the girl thought that Peta would be happy to know that her thing would be repaired and thought about buying her a pumpkin cookie to cheer her up. But she was scared to death after a few seconds when someone said, "Boo," and put his hands on her shoulders. Returning, the girl saw the first prince, who raised his hands in a conciliatory gesture and began to apologize. Daisy started to bow as the prince asked if she was okay, but he started to stop her, wondering what she was doing. Glen covered her mouth before she could say anything and put a finger to his lips. He asked the girl to be quieter, because the aristocrats he knew would not let him pass. They were talking about where Daisy was, and the prince heard that she was on her way home. Knowing that she had no business, the boy asked with a smile if she would dine with him while Daisy clutched the strap of her purse. The prince laughed when she asked if he wanted her to go with him to the palace. He said that he fled from there and was not going to return so soon. He said with a smug look that he would say if he was caught that she wasn't involved in his escape, when Daisy cried out that she really was. Blushing a little, the prince looked at the girl in front of him and asked her to keep him company at dinner. She agreed with a smile, and the prince was overjoyed at this. Walking by, the prince said that he knew a place not far from here and that she would definitely like it. With a sly smile, the girl thought that the prince ran away from the palace a lot, otherwise he would not know the area so well. She took the prince from Shana's restaurant, where she used to work, so that no one would notice her there, and led the bewildered prince to somewhere he would like better. When they were already in the establishment, the girl smiled and said that her hobby was to look where the most delicious, when the prince said that he would not have thought that this would be her favorite place. Smiling broadly, the prince said that he too liked the delicious houses, as she called them, where they cooked delicious food. The boy began to tell that everything is monotonous in the palace, and even the food loses its taste, when Daisy listened carefully. Looking at the menu, the prince chose what he could order, stopping at the dish of the day, beef. She looked up at the boy, thinking that he didn't even look at the whole menu, but immediately looked at the dish of the day, so he goes to restaurants a lot. She expertly explained to a surprised Glen that the dish of the day was an expired product, so something else had to be ordered. In order not to answer the prince's question about how she knew this, the girl quickly found a pork dish and immediately turned her attention to it, poking at the dish on the menu. The prince said with a smile and a little blush that he had no reason to refuse. After trying the dish that Daisy ordered, the prince began to praise the taste because it really was incredible. While they ate, they talked, and the girl asked, ascertaining whether he really used the name Ren when he left the palace. Leaning over, Glenn whispered into the girl's ear, who was listening intently, the secret that Ren was part of his full name, Brent. She started to laugh, but became serious again, looking at the boy and not understanding why he was looking at her like that.
She replied that he could indeed ask something personal, but she was surprised and could not understand what he wanted to ask about.
Daisy sipped her tea when the prince asked if she had a special relationship with the Duke, embarrassed by the question. When she turned her head to face him, he was serious, asking the same question again, if she had a special relationship with the Duke. He began to explain that he and the Duke often appear together and also live in the same house. When the author said that she lives nearby, so that Milady could study better, the prince surprised her by asking if they only had a working relationship. She remembered that they had recently been on a date when he had taken her to a bridge she had always wanted to visit. Then she thought that her heart beat faster when she saw him, and remembered the moment when she stood in front of him after the boat ride. She blushed a little, looking at the prince, because she thought that, despite all this, she and the Duke were not close. Daisy looked at Glenn in surprise, when Glenn, saying he was asking too many questions, laughed and poured her tea into her cup. As soon as the nanny returned, the girl immediately flew to meet her, asking why she was taking so long and whether it was possible to repair her gift. Mala was very glad that her rim would be as good as new when Daisy assured her of it. And now Peta was pulling the nanny's hand to show her something. She looked surprised at the fact that the Hardys were sitting together and very busy with something. They showed Daisy an incredibly beautiful house they made out of goodies, but they were just going to add a chocolate door to it. The girl was surprised when Hardy reached out and told her that Milady had been crying while they were building everything, and the Duke was trying to carefully fasten the door there. Realizing that they made this house to distract Peta, the nanny apologized to the girl, saying that she was late, meeting someone in the city. When the Duke asked who exactly she had seen, Daisy began to say that she had accidentally met Prince Glenn. Hearing this, Dayon couldn't help but to react, and was now looking confused at what he had just done. In his hand was a broken chocolate door from the house. Hardy and Daisy began to calm the little one down as she rehearsed hysterically through the door. The Duke sat in his place, thinking about himself and looking at one point in front of him. The butler looked at the Duke with pity, realizing that he would never have thought how he would suffer from unrequited love. While Hanson said that the prince was an unusual person for running away from the palace, with sarcasm of course, Hardy said with a smile that Daisy must have liked it too. The Duke, supporting his head with his hand, frowned, but nevertheless asked the butler if he was really so callous. And then, Hardy began to emotionally tell the Duke to say what was on his mind, be it bad or good emotions. The Duke glared at Hardy when he asked what he would do when Daisy fell in love with Prince Glenn. At the same time, although the hour was late, a letter with a red label was delivered to the Duke's estate, which meant the urgency of the message. As he dressed the next morning, the Duke kept thinking about Hardy's words, singing Prince Glenn's praises yesterday. Hanson had already gone outside, where a carriage was waiting for him. He was going to Bernice. Daisy followed, holding the shawl over her shoulders. She said with a smile and a little embarrassment that she would do everything possible to prevent the meeting of the second prince and Peta, because she thought that this was what he was worried about. The girl was surprised. She found herself in the Duke's strong but gentle arms. Stroking her hair, he promised that he would come home as soon as possible. Embracing the author and feeling her clutching his clothes, he told her out loud that he would miss her. Sitting at the table in the dining room, the girl did not pay attention to Peta, who was eating next to her, thinking only about what the Duke told her before leaving. To distract herself a little, the girl stroked Kashtanchik's hair, which made her smile. But then she looked at the girl in surprise, blushing a little, and said that Daisy was the same as her father. Hardy brought the letter to the even more surprised girl, while the little girl thought that her father was the author of it. Seeing that the letter was from the prince, the butler did not walk around and directly asked what the girl was doing with the prince. Hardy wailed that they could not refuse the prince, but the timing was not too good because the Duke was not there, and he wanted to stop by on the way back because he was traveling on business. The boy looked like a devil when he said that the prince must be busy and they should give him a cup of tea and see him off. But they did not have time to agree. Hardy shouted that the prince was already here when Daisy looked around in confusion. As soon as the prince got out of the carriage, Daisy bowed, saying that she was glad of his visit and that it was an honor for the whole family. They exchanged pleasantries, and the prince immediately apologized if he embarrassed her with his speech, and she only replied that she was not embarrassed at all, though she lied. But the prince after a few seconds began to laugh loudly, asking if it was really so, because he saw the expression on her face. The servants who accompanied the first prince did not understand what was happening, wondering how the future monarch behaved. But suddenly, Prince Edward got out of the back of the carriage, wiping the sweat from his forehead and saying that it was not easy. Glenn was surprised to see his brother. His servant asked in confusion how he came to be, and Daisy could not believe that the little prince was in their estate because it was not according to plan. Peta, looking out the window, held her favorite toy in her hand and asked herself who else it was. The first prince started cursing at his brother, asking him where he got out of. The little boy happily said that he climbed into the box when his brother had already got into the carriage, and no one noticed him. The elder prince ordered the boy to be immediately taken to the palace, while he became as if he was going to fight with the servants. But Edward climbed onto one of the lanterns, clung to it with his hands and feet, announcing that he was not going anywhere. And while all the servants tried to unhook him from the lantern, Glenn folded his arms over his chest and looked at his brother with anger in his eyes. The second prince returned to his brother with tears in his eyes, saying that he had been absent all day and had been taught difficult manners. Daisy tried to pull herself together and think only of Chestnut, because she was the priority, and she felt sorry for the little one. Glenn was visibly angry as his brother tried to negotiate a different solution, but he was adamant. With tears in his eyes, Edward held onto the lantern as his older brother tugged at his legs, trying to unhook him and send him home. One of the governesses happily told Peta, who did not share her joy, that this little boy was the second prince. Edward clung to his brother's leg, sobbing hysterically. Chestnut thought unhappily about who had come to visit Daisy, looking now at him, then at the one whom the governess called a prince. The girl tried to restrain Peta when she, mad with anger, wanted to run out of the room. She should have stayed in her room today. Edward stared in wonder at the sword hanging on the wall, asking if it was what the Duke used, and Hardy replied with a smile that it was. The girl remembered the face and smile of Dion, who also said that it is better to change the plot, and not to hide the girl from all the male characters. Sitting down next to the little one, Daisy offered him to try the cookies. He and Hardy high-fived each other, pleased with themselves, because you can make a child happier just by giving them cookies. Not bad, Prince Edward said, but the cookies tasted a lot better than he'd let on. While his brother was eating the cookies, Glenn said he came to talk to Daisy, much to her surprise. Hardy was standing behind the prince and got angry when the first prince said that he stopped by so that the girl could recommend him some more restaurants where they cooked delicious food. When the girl with a respectable face said that she would share, although she does not tell anyone about her favorite places, the boy was happy. With a smile, he moved closer, suggesting that they should definitely go to one of these places together. Daisy was surprised at the proposal, looking at the prince while Hardy, behind her, nearly exploded with emotion. The butler began to cough, causing the girl to turn to him and ask if he was okay. He apologized for coughing, but mentally begged the Duke to come back soon. Glenn apologized for the unplanned visit with a smile and thanked him for being a guest. Prince Edward, leaving the cookies, sadly asked if they were going home. Taking the girl by the skirt, the boy looked up at her, asking her to go with them to the palace, and added that this is an order. But in the next moment, Peta rushed at him, who would not have let the nanny go anywhere with these two for anything. Mala got angry, looking at her opponent and saying, as if cutting her off, Daisy will not go anywhere. She also added that they should be dropped off at her home. Daisy shouted that you can't behave like that, because it's a prince. Kashtanchik did not care that the prince was sobbing in front of her. She angrily asked him who he was to take Daisy away from her, and also called him a child. Finally, the governess appeared, to whom the author quickly put Peta in her hands, saying that she was leaving her to her. Hardy, taking the crying prince in his arms and asking with a smile if he would like to look at the stamp collection belonging to the Duke. Daisy was still standing in the position in which she was holding Nutcracker when the children were taken to different rooms, while Glenn was just laughing heartily. The nanny, bowing, apologized for disrespecting the prince, while the eldest of the brothers looked at her again in surprise. But Glenn laughed quietly again, saying that everything was fine because they were only children. He looked at the girl in front of him with a look that left her questioning. However, he said that she was amazing, and he wanted to know everything about her. Daisy thought it was about Peta because they were talking about her, so she explained with a smile that it was because of her hair, because it was short. But her smile immediately disappeared when the prince said that he didn't mean the child. The prince, changing the subject, asked Daisy when she planned to come to the palace, which once again surprised her that she even asked what he was talking about. He explained that then Edward would be off the hook, and most importantly, he would also like to see the girl again. Glenn blushed slightly as he looked at her and smiled sweetly. In bonus, the Duke even questioned what his servant was saying when he said he had received a letter asking the prince to pay a visit to the estate. Folding his hands in front of him, Hanson thought about what the servant had told him. The prince had been at his house yesterday, and he had no idea. Dismissing the servant, he took his cloak and left the office. When they finally saw off both princes, Daisy immediately found Chestnut in her arms. Hugging the girl, the nanny asked why she was behaving so badly, but the little girl replied that little girl wanted to take her away. Mala replied that she did not like him at once, while the girl thought how to keep them away from each other, for she could not say directly that she would not treat the prince badly. Crouching next to the girl, Daisy stroked her hair with a laugh when she said she had to babysit. In the evening, Peta was depressed, saying that it was already evening, and Dad still hadn't sent a letter, although it didn't look like him. While the girl was crying that her father could have forgotten, Daisy said that she had grown up and that her father could now go a little further from home, which attracted the attention of Chestnut.
Hugging the nanny, the little girl said that as long as she was around, everything was fine.
Daisy, putting Peta to bed, said that tomorrow a letter from Dad would definitely come, and today she should go to bed because it's already late. Leaving the girl's room, Daisy hid behind the column in surprise, looking questioningly at the figure wandering around the palace at such a late hour. She was looking at a tall figure in a black cloak, whose face was hidden under a hood. Placing her hand over her mouth, she rolled her eyes as she dismissed one version after another. The servants were already asleep, and Hardy— after all, it couldn't be Dion. Bursting into the room, the nanny shouted for Peta to run from here, pressing against the door from the inside of the room. But her mouth was soon closed. She was very scared, but she saw a familiar face under the hood. It was the Duke, after all. Dion scratched the back of his head in embarrassment when the girl asked if he shouldn't be in bonus. Seeing that his clothes were all wet and that he was driving at night, she put her hand to her mouth and asked in fear if something had happened. Dion took the girl's hand, saying that it wasn't what she had in mind and that Hardy's help, whom she was about to call, wouldn't be needed. He asked the girl to wait in the room for a few minutes because he had to wash himself from the road. Returning and blushing a little, the Duke asked the author not to wake anyone while she was waiting for him. Dressed in a plaid and with tea handed to him by Daisy, the Duke thanked her with a smile as he sat in front of the fireplace. Without saying a word, because she was looking at his lips, the girl turned her head to the side and asked if Dion had left Bonus yesterday, to which he replied that he had, at midnight. She couldn't believe it, because he had been driving for a day without sleep. They looked at each other as Daisy tried to show him that the Duke needed to rest by bulging his eyes. Without looking at Daisy, he turned the subject to the guests at their house, though he was unhappy that they were talking about the prince and that he was here at all. Crossing her arms over her chest, the girl said she almost died of fright when Prince Edward climbed out. All his thoughts were gone, and Hanson turned to Daisy, questioning whether she had really spoken of the second prince. They talked about what had happened, and the Duke thanked her for hosting in his absence, and also asked about Hardy, mentioning the butler. Sitting together, the author said that Peta will correspond with Reconciling, and that she recently said that the nanny looks like her father. But all the girl's joy disappeared when she heard that the Duke would have to return to Bonus because he had not yet finished his affairs there. She started apologizing, shouting, because he was leaving tomorrow morning and he hadn't rested and hadn't slept for more than a day. However, just as Daisy was about to get up from the couch, the Duke grabbed her hand, holding her close to him. The girl turned to him in surprise. He asked to stay close a little longer and then rested his head on her shoulder. Both of them were as red as crayfish. They sat together in front of the fireplace until the Duke, without realizing it, fell asleep. Daisy also didn't realize she had fallen asleep next to the Duke. They were both now sleeping without their hind legs. Opening her eyes, The girl looked at the sleeping Dion, calm and sweet, and he was lying too close. The little girl stood happily in the room with her arms outstretched and glad that her father and Daisy had already woken up. Hardy, who was standing next to him, was very happy. He said that they are successful, but they need to do even better. Peta ran to Nanny and Dad, while the two blushed again from the awkwardness of the situation and were now sitting on different sides of the couch. Sitting in class, Prince Edward was thinking that he was bored, and his brother, as usual, wrote a letter to Daisy. Hearing about the crown princess and the fact that his brother would have to get married soon, the little boy dropped his pen in surprise. The little one thought about what the teacher had said about the fact that he would call his wife to live in the palace. If his brother has to marry, then let it be very Daisy.
Looking at another letter, Hardy couldn't understand why the prince was trying so hard to invite Daisy to the palace.
The butler screamed in his mind, "Is Daisy already waiting for letters from the first prince? And suddenly she likes him?" Folding his hands on his chest, he thought that it would be better for the girl to go to the palace already, so that the prince would finally calm down. But after a few days, looking at the carriage that came after her, Hardy realized with fear that he was wrong in his conclusions. Peta appeared next to him and asked where her nanny was going today. Hardy lied that he was on business, because a picture appeared in his head of how Milady would behave if she found out that Daisy had gathered at the imperial palace. The girl quickly changed into pumpkin clothes and looked in different directions to check if there was anyone nearby who would notice her. Two little men in beautiful clothes bowed to the girl, welcoming her to the palace. She thought that being here for the ball, she hadn't even noticed how beautiful the emperor's palace was. Prince Glen appeared in front of her almost immediately, who greeted her with a smile and asked how she got there. He also admitted that he was really waiting for her. Daisy bowed, saying hello, and saying she was glad to see him too. The prince pushed back his collar, showing his neck and saying that he had been looking at the gate for so long, stretching it out, that his neck had grown longer. Laughing into her fist, Daisy joked that the prince was a little taller now. The little one, standing by his brother, bowed to the girl and greeted Lady Heidi, saying that she must have been a long way, and bidding her make herself at home. The first prince laughed heartily as his brother finished his monologue. But, coming closer, Edward asked her to go inside as quickly as possible and volunteered to accompany her. She bent down, offering her hand to the little prince, so that he would help as he offered. However, she turned in confusion to a voice she would have recognized at any time. With cries of "Daisy!" Peta ran to her, scaring all the servants standing nearby. Extending her hands to the girl, she asked her why she got out of the luggage compartment and how she could have ended up here. Putting her hand to her forehead, the author could not believe that Kashtanchik did the same thing as Edward a few days ago. The little girl, with a guilty expression on her face, begged for forgiveness and said that it would not happen again, while the nanny was nervous, because she knew that they would be in trouble when the Duke found out. The prince approached her, offering to send a letter to the Duke of Hanson just in case, so that he would not worry about his daughter. However, their conversation about the letter was interrupted by Edward, who pointed a finger at the girl and shouted, recognizing her. He squealed that a person who did not know manners could not be in the palace, especially how she dared to cross his threshold without an invitation. The two children were set against each other because they had not gotten along from the beginning, and Daisy, looking at these two, did not know what to do. Peta, pointing her finger at the prince, said that he was much smaller than Rodison, and she was even shorter than Peta herself, but she laughed. Poking his finger at the girl, Edward asked his brother to send her back, because she was constantly insulting him, and they hadn't called her yet. Chestnut bowed, greeting Prince Glen, and politely introducing himself to him by his full name. And then she raised her head and looked at the prince with the sweetest look, asking if she could join the tour of the palace. The first prince left the girl in the palace, saying she could check for pumpkins herself, while his little brother raged behind him. Returning to the little one, he asked them both not to quarrel, for they had invited Lady Daisy to have a good time at the palace, and scandals were not part of that invitation. The girl looked gratefully at the prince, thanking him also with words. They both exhaled knowingly, because they understood each other and how it was not easy for them to cope with children of Edward's age in the Pietà. While Edward was trying to talk smugly about the horses, the little one ran to them, to the utter astonishment of the prince and the nurse. Smiling, the prince said that my lady was not afraid of anything and asked her if she wanted to ride. To keep the secret, Glen whispered in the girl's ear that his younger brother was actually still afraid of horses. One of the servants, who was passing by, remembered with a laugh that Glenn had been with horses since he was a child, and the old man was running behind him, and now his knees hurt. And the prince said that he would bring him the best medicine. The author was surprised to see how the prince communicates so freely and informally with the groom. With a laugh, but a little awkwardly, the boy asked if she thought he was behaving strangely. She began to feverishly make excuses that this was not the case, but simply for her such communication was a novelty. Returning to the little one, he said that he has a lot of responsibility on his shoulders because of his brother, and it is getting harder for him not to notice her and the many responsibilities. He said that he needed to become someone whom his brother would trust without limit, because usually the throne is a place of loneliness. Rolling her eyes, she thought that if the throne was occupied by Edward, then everything would be like in the plot of the novel, and all her efforts with the Duke would be in vain. The prince felt guilty, because he thought he had confused her with his problems. However, when Daisy replied that it wasn't, he plucked up the courage to ask her out, which she couldn't help but agree to, simply by whooping. But as soon as what the prince had said reached her, she cried out, asking Happy Glenn what he had just said. He happily said that he had recently received a letter from the Duke of Hanson, who promised to invite him to visit as soon as he had completed all his affairs. He whispered in her ear that he had learned from the servants about many interesting places in Bonus, so she must go with him, and the girl was too confused by all this. Glancing at him, Daisy thought that the prince was always learning about her tastes, and maybe that was why she was comfortable around him. But looking at him, she couldn't digest that he asked her out. It was too much. Peta, who was riding on a swing, was approached by Edward, who called her "Hey you," and told her not to call Lady Daisy by her first name. Folding his hands on his chest, he got angry because the girl was ignoring him, so he played the last card. He told her to stop calling the princess by her first name only. Chestnut stopped riding on the swing and now stood in front of the prince, just as angry as he was. They began to argue, and the little one asked why he thought she would become a princess. Clenching his hands into fists and holding back no longer, Edward screamed that this was His Majesty's order. Peta calmly said that His Majesty had messed something up or made the prince even more angry. He couldn't believe how dare she say such things. Looking all cute and innocent, the girl said that Daisy was her mother after all. At the prince's question, she returned to the swing, where she now sat solemnly and said that it would officially happen in about 20 days. And while Glenn was happy that the two had finally reconciled, Daisy couldn't take her eyes off the children, remembering all the things she had tried to save Peta from. The prince could not understand where the girl was hovering, because she did not respond to his remark about children and their whims, thinking about something of her own, and looking somewhere to the side. When they arrived home, they were met by a frightened and at the same time angry Hardy, who immediately called Milady and ran to meet her. Embracing the surprised girl, the butler told her not to do that again, because he was scared to death. Hugging Hardy, she apologized, because she thought everything would be fine, because she left a letter where she told where she was going. They swore on their little fingers that this would never happen again. When the butler bent his ear to the girl, she whispered the request she had for him. Holding the paper Hardy had given her in her hand, the girl asked if she should then put the letter in an envelope and give it to him. After he said he would send the letter tomorrow with a courier, they were both smiling widely, and Peta thanked him for his help. Holding the paper, the little girl joyfully thought about the fact that she would write her first letter to her father, and it was an exciting moment for her. She began to draw letters with pencils, first of all greeting her father in a letter and asking how he was doing. Sitting in his office in Bonus, the Duke carefully read his daughter's letter that she had been in the palace, met the first prince, and seen the squire, his brother. A few days after he received the letter, he stood at the window and was distracted because the butler said he had prepared refreshments. The old man, who admired the Duke, said that probably Daisy and Peta had already passed through the forest and would be here soon. They were standing near the castle. The butler was surprised when the Duke simply folded his arms across his chest and looked tiredly ahead. His daughter was the first to run out to him in his fantasy, who happily greeted Dad and ran to hug him. He also saw Daisy also raise her hand in greeting, showing that she was glad to see him. He even closed his eyes and smiled, although this made it even more apparent how tortured and tired he was. Prince Glenn got out of the carriage, lamenting that they had finally arrived. The Duke was surprised that the prince had arrived, but he bowed politely, welcoming him to the castle. But he was angry. You could see it only for a few seconds. His eyes were bloodshot, because he did not understand why the prince was here. Daisy looked out from the carriage, called him by name, and greeted him. The girl was glad to see the Duke. She asked with interest how he was doing, coming closer. Trying to filter what he was saying, the Duke asked why the two of them were with the prince. He calmly replied that his brother fell ill, so he could not come. When he heard that his daughter had not come because many people were sick, he tried his best to remain polite and wished Prince Edward a speedy recovery. Smiling, Daisy remembered that she had a present for the Duke, so she reached into her purse to give it to him. She gave the bag and the letter, saying that the first was from her, and the letter was from Peta.
And then, the poker-faced Duke watches the two chat about some tea, and the prince asks if she really liked it too.
Looking at all this, the Duke became angry. He remembered the lines of his daughter's letter that he had received a few days ago. She said that the little one had said that Daisy would become a princess, and that this was His Majesty's order.